Hello and welcome back, guys. Glad to see you around. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Book of the Dead, Chapter 71. Tyron heaved the last pile into the back of the cart. He groaned and rubbed his back. His constitution might have toughened him up beyond what would have normally been humanly possible, but his strength remained pitifully weak. That's why you use the skeletons to do the heavy lifting, Dove advised from his position atop one of the poles that rose from the back corner of the cart. You're a mage, it's undignified to lift things. We have minions and strength-based allies for the manual labor. I'm still waiting for my magic to top off, Tyron grimaced. The after effects of drawing on the arcane crystal too deeply were less than pleasant. Reduced energy replenishment was the lightest of it. Temporarily, his body was effectively intolerant of magic, which didn't go well when he contained a constantly refilling well of the stuff within his body. As long as he did his best to burn off the energy and reduce the rate of intake, the symptoms were minimized. If he'd been unconscious, like he'd been the first time, unable to deliberately rid himself of the energy, he'd have been at risk of death again. He had Munhold to thank for pulling him out of it this time. He was past the worst of it now, and ready to fill himself back up, hence trying to reduce the amount of moving his minions needed to do. Is that all of it then? Dove asked him. That's it, Tyron dusted off his hands. We're ready to go whenever. You'd better go and say your goodbyes then. Looks like the crew has come out to see you off. Tyron turned to see the women and children gathering just outside the buildings. He groaned. This was not the sort of thing he was comfortable with. Elsbeth and Munhold were both there as well. Seeing no way he could graciously avoid it, he trudged back towards the courtyard and stood awkwardly for a moment, not sure if he should be the one to speak first. It was Annette who broke the silence. We wanted to thank you, she said. If it hadn't been for your help, we would probably all be dead. The necromancer shrugged nervously. It's, no problem, he said, and it's not over. You all need to be, careful, he finished lamely. We know, the middle-aged widow nodded. We'll keep watch. Those bastards won't get anything but arrows if they come back here again. He didn't doubt it. He turned to leave, but hesitated. When the Slayers get here, he started. We won't say anything, she assured him, her face determined. After what you've done for us, we won't sell you out. He was touched by the sentiment, but he didn't want these people to die on his behalf. Be careful, he said, after a pause. If you get caught in a lie, you'll be killed. They may, sense the magic used here, so you won't gain anything by trying to conceal me. Uncertainty flickered in her gaze, and he tried to smile, to let her know it was okay, but it looked more like a grimace. He stepped over to Elsbeth. It was good to see you again, Beth, he said. I'm glad things sort of worked out for you. The blonde girl smiled sadly. I hope everything sort of works out for you too, she said, and stepped forward to hug him. He gave her a light pat on the back with one arm. You're a rare beast, Munhold told him when Elsbeth let go, an illegal mage on the run. You've managed to gain levels without getting branded. They don't like that. They'll be coming for you even harder now. Who specifically are you talking about? The Slayers. Them too, Munhold grinned. You need help if you want to survive. Call on the three when you're ready. They'll take care of you. I bet they will, he grumbled internally. He didn't trust himself not to say something he would regret to the priestess. He had no desire to antagonize her or her patrons, so he simply nodded and turned. He walked back to the cart and did not turn as he climbed up into the back, as his remaining minions took up the burden and began to drag him back to the east. He'd done something good here, helped people who were not in a position to help themselves. He wished he hadn't been forced to kill people, yet he did not regret it. Well, that was all kinds of fucked up in the end, Dove remarked from his post. You've probably got what you need, though. Ready to graduate from being a weak piece of shit. You think I've reached it then? Tyron asked. I've reached my goals. I think after you bring your next round of bony boys into the world, you'll have done enough. More than enough. Tyron glanced down at the bundles of bones he had placed in the back of the cart. They were still cooking, if he were to borrow a term. Not yet fully saturated with death magic. He'd hoped to remain and complete his work at the farm, but he didn't have the time. After speaking with Elsbeth last night, he had immediately begun to make his preparations to leave. His desire to stay had only grown stronger after spending time with her, and he recognized and feared that impulse. He wouldn't lose his chance at grasping hold of destiny to chase at the tail of his former crush. Elsbeth had her own path and she was facing it well. He would do well to do the same. I think I'll work on a few things while we travel, he said. In a couple of days, we can stop, create the minions, and then I'll check my status. That should give us enough space, Dove grunted. As long as we get far enough into the foothills, we shouldn't have any issues with slayers and marshals. They don't give a shit beyond a certain point. Did you want to head back to the village from before? No, we need to head somewhere new, Tyron said. I'm not satisfied that place is remote enough. Fucking hell, more remote than that? The necromancer took hold of a tightly bound bag strapped to his waist. We need to be far from anyone with the senses to detect what we are about. Got some rituals you want to cast? I just might. Elsewhere, Rufus cleaned the blood from his sword on some grass before he inspected the edge. He'd need to clean it properly back at camp, but it was important not to let liquids dry on the metal. Satisfied, he shoved the weapon back into its sheath. Around him, various others from the college were doing the same, tending to their gear, checking the dead for calls, and pulling arrows from the corpses. Did you get a few kills, Rufus? A voice called from behind him. Laurel stalked towards him through the woods, eyes flicking for targets. She was like a different person out in the wild, all signs of her usual, languid behavior replaced by cold, deliberate efficiency. 3, he said. You. 5, she replied, a satisfied gleam in her eyes. The experience probably isn't anything great, but it'll definitely help accelerate my growth. He nodded. I kind of expected there to be more of them, to be honest. He flicked a hand at the Rift King corpses that dotted the area around them. For our first venture against the monsters, this has been a bit of a letdown. Laurel scoffed. You really think they were going to send us anywhere difficult to fight against the serious kin? I wouldn't be surprised if some silvers have already swept through this area, and we're just mopping up the dregs. Even so, we should be grateful. She stalked over to one kin lying dead on the ground and planted her boot on it, before pulling her arrow free. She inspected the arrowhead with careful attention before wiping it clean and stowing it away in her quiver. Normally we wouldn't get even this taste until we'd advanced our class, stuck in the college for a year. This little trip is going to cut months off of our training. Rufus jangled a bag on his waist. And earn a little coin along the way, he smiled. Laurel appraised him with that same, considering look. This trip had been good for Rufus. He'd been getting clingy and emotional, which wasn't like him. He'd been so focused on his goal for so long. Perhaps finally moving toward it had knocked him off the trail. He was back on it now, and his eyes burned with new confidence. Do you believe what they had to say about Tyron? She asked him. Any satisfaction fled from his face at the mention of that name, and he stomped closer. Keep your voice down, he growled. You want the others to know we have something to do with him. It would hardly be illegal if we did, she said, one brow raised. Besides, there's no one in earshot, which you'd know if you were looking properly. He glanced around. You're right. Sorry. Do I believe it? No. You know him as well as I do. He might be ahead in magic, taught himself a thing or two, but to cause a rift to break, no chance. So you think they're lying to us? What I think is that I don't care if they're lying to us. We know what he looks like, what he sounds like, and none of these other wannabes do. We have the advantage when it comes to hunting that bounty. You don't think Magnan and Beery would murder you in your bed for killing him? Laurel asked. You saw what they did to the Mez farm. Do I believe it when they said his family were fine with it? No, that's more bullshit. But do I believe the Steelums go around killing slayers they don't like? Also no. Besides, there's no guarantee they would ever learn it was us. I wouldn't mind splitting the gold with someone else and putting their name on the achievement. Rufus, that's almost clever. Thanks, he grunted. What do you think? Don't give me any non-committal bullshit, either. I want something solid out of you for a change. She thought carefully as she continued to scan around. There's more going on here than we realize. Tyron is a very capable magic user, and I believe he might have learned something dangerous enough to destabilize a rift. But that would be a long shot, she conceded. But I'm starting to think similarly to you. Who cares what else is going on? Tyron awakened at the same time we did. He can't be very strong yet. No matter who finds him, he won't put up much of a fight, and someone is going to get that bounty. I don't mind if it's me, though I wouldn't want many people knowing I was the one who did it. Rufus grinned, but Laurel shook her head in warning. The chances we manage to track him down are almost nil. Keep that in mind. We are sweeping through the middle of nowhere, going from here all the way to the mountains. It's not as if we can just sneak off on our own. We're here for the kin. I understand that, he assured her. I just wanted to reach an understanding in case the impossible happens. Gather in 5. Move it, slugs, came a roar from a distance off. Better keep moving then. See you tonight, Rufus said. Until we leave the wilds. My tent is for sleeping only, Laurel denied him. He shrugged. Might as well try his luck with someone else then. Chapter 72. Tyron stared at his new minions. The skeletons stared back at him. He frowned. There was something different about them. He could feel it, but not identify it. Like a word tingling on the tip of the tongue. He didn't think it was due to their appearance. All skeletons differed from each other, simply due to human physiology. He also couldn't find anything unusual about the way the magic moved between him and them, either. As far as he could tell, it functioned exactly as it always had. The new minions were drawing noticeably less than his old ones had, but that was simply due to his improvement over time. There was something else, and he couldn't work out what it was, and that was driving him slightly mad. Stop staring at them so hard, Dove advised him. I can't tell if you're trying to solve a complex magical problem, or you're just horny. I know we're pretty remote, but you can do better than the undead, man. There has to be a deer or sheep or something around here. Shut up, Dove. Tyron grunted irritably before he sighed and shook his head. I give up, he declared. I've tried everything I can think of, but I can't figure it out. It'll have to wait until I've got more time to find a solution. That's likely to be never, kid. Once you advance your class, you're going to be doubly illegal in the eyes of the Magisters. Not only an illegal class, but an unregistered bronze rank. And since you're a mage, they would definitely refuse to let you advance without getting marked. Dove sounded a little sour as he mentioned the brand that every Slayer bore. More than a little. If everyone hates the brand so much, how do they keep getting away with it? Tyron asked. Slayers aren't exactly easy people to control, after all, which is exactly why they go to these lengths to control them. A single mage with a level in the 80s could probably level a city with the high-tier magic they have access to. A swordsman like your father can cut through 1 million ordinary people in a day. Without the brand ensuring a level of compliance, there would be chaos. At least, that's what they'll tell you. The summoner sounded as if he wanted to spit, but obviously couldn't. Fuck. At any rate, at this point, they have so many big dick slayers branded that not doing it is basically a death sentence. All of the most powerful people in the Empire have it, and they don't particularly want to spend the rest of their lives in perpetual agony, so they will cut your fucking head off fast. Unless you can get yourself all the way to the upper levels without being detected, you're shit out of luck. Want to rank up? Get the mark. End of discussion. Tyron absorbed this in silence. It made sense, in a cruel way. No other group was subjected to the same level of brutal control as the Slayers. In return, they were lionized, hero-worshipped by the people across the Empire and richly rewarded. But for many, it surely wasn't worth it. His own parents were so fiercely protective of their freedom and independence. He simply couldn't understand why they would allow themselves to be controlled in this way. It went against everything he knew of them. If it's so bad, then why do so many people do it? Rogel and your team were pushing to promote out of silver, which meant even tighter restrictions on yourselves. How many Slayers turn their back on advancement and stay as they are? Not many, Dove replied, sounding bitter. Silence fell between the necromancer and the skull for a moment as Dove organized his thoughts. A few do, he said, usually at level 39 or 59. They put their hands up and call it a day, never calling on the status ritual again, and living out their lives without advancing to the next step. They stay at silver or gold, content with their lot and then die. But not many can do that. There are all sorts of chains that can bind a person, Tyron, all sorts of ways we can be made a slave. You know Magnan and Beery didn't want to take the brand, but they still did. Why? Tyron shook his head. There's 1,000 ways to bind someone, the skull repeated. Money, family, obligation, law, heritage, force. By taking the brand, your parents were able to make themselves so powerful that the brand itself was the only thing that bound them. No one could tell them where to go, what to do. Nobody could buy them off, threaten their well-being, except through the mark. They were able to free themselves of all but one chain. Not a bad trade-off, when you think about the alternative. The young mage thought back to survivors on the farm, those women and children powerless to defend themselves, with no say in whether they would live or die. Even one chain would have been too many for them, he said, but in the end they bound themselves with two. They had me as well. That may be true to an extent as well, Dove chuckled, but at least that's one that they took on of their own free will. There is nothing that binds me, he realized, only my family. Why did you want to advance? He asked his mentor after a pause. You didn't want to stop, you weren't happy to stay still. If you hate the Magisters so much, why were you willing to let them have a tighter grip on you? Those bare teeth seemed to grin evilly at him as the light flared inside the skull. You're about to find out, kid. Stop fucking around and get on with it already. Tyron froze for a moment before he smiled wryly. He'd been delaying. It was true. He was so nervous about this that he was looking for ways to put it off. That obvious. Everyone's shit scared the first time, especially in your case. I know some people who spend 6 months to a year making sure they have everything perfect before taking the leap, and I think you would too if you had the time. But you don't, so stop being such a wimp and fucking get it done. Fine, fine. He blew out a lungful of air before he pushed himself to his feet. He had to be careful moving around inside the cave. The low ceiling was a feature he was getting particularly tired of. It had taken them 3 days to find this place, and they needed yours help to boot. The vampire had an uncanny ability to find little nooks and crannies that the sun would never touch. A necessary survival mechanism, considering what she was. They were higher in the foothills than they'd been before, a couple of hours away from a small hamlet that they had yet to visit. Remote, isolated, hidden. Perfect for a fledgling necromancer wanting to work on his last set of minions and advance. Tyron had gone all in on those bones. He'd picked over them with relentless focus during the entire journey, finding any weakness or impurity he could detect, and purging it with extreme care. The saturation of death magic had been monitored on an almost hourly basis, and studied in minute detail. Everything he could think of that might have a positive effect on the resulting minion, he'd done twice over. The stitching on most of the minions had been done multiple times, despite the tight time frames he'd worked in. The casting of the ritual felt like the culmination of his magnum opus. He'd spent days working with Dove on the final version of the Raised Dead ritual. Entire sections had been rebuilt from the ground up, cutting and changing the form of the magic to produce a more efficient, robust version that he was inordinately proud of. A more experienced necromancer, if one existed, would probably laugh at his flimsy attempts to improve and develop the magic. But with the limited knowledge and resources he had, Tyron felt confident it was the best he could do. The final set of minions, enough to bring his army back to a full 20, were far and away the best he'd ever produced. Their movement was smoother, quicker and more cost-efficient, their minds were sharper, and the conduit that transferred his magic to them was as tight as a drum and half as leaky. He hoped it would be enough. Heart pounding in his chest, he rummaged in his pack until he was able to find his spare book and ripped free a page. Paper in hand, he found a comfortable spot on the floor and prepared himself. Here we go, he muttered. How exciting, Yor whispered into his ear. Blood and bone. Tyron jumped a foot in the air before collapsing back down, clutching at his chest. You almost killed me. Yor, what was that for? You must allow me my amusements, given our remote and destitute location, she said, red eyes dancing. But I apologize for delaying the moment. I simply wanted to be here to witness the occasion. Still didn't have to scare me, Tyron grumbled, and the vampire reached down to stroke his hair. Come now, the ritual, she reminded him, and Tyron focused on the paper before him. Some of the tension had drained out of him, but he still felt the blood pounding in his head as he nicked his thumb on his knife, placed his hand on the page, and incanted the words. Immediately, the blood began to drain from the small wound on his hand and spread across the page, forming words that would change his life from that moment onward. Scarce able to breathe, he blinked rapidly and leant forward to read. Events. You have forged bonds and connections with others. Race. Human has reached level 14. Your attempts at cooking have increased proficiency. Cooking has reached level 3. Dismembering remains has increased your proficiency. Butchery has reached level 5, max. Intense study and application has increased your proficiency. Corpse appraisal has reached level 10. Intense study and application has increased your proficiency. Corpse preparation has reached level 10. Your use of repository has increased proficiency. Your creation of new undead and your manipulation of the spell form has increased proficiency. Raised Dead has reached level 10. Your use of the spell Bone Stitching has increased proficiency. Bone Stitching has reached level 10. Your use of Bone Mending has increased proficiency. Bone Mending has reached level 5. Your use and study of Death Magic has increased your proficiency. Death Magic has reached level 8. Your use of Death Blades has increased your proficiency. Death Blades has reached level 5. Your use of Fear has increased your proficiency. Fear has reached level 3. Your use of Magic Bolt has increased proficiency. Magic Bolt has reached level 5, max. You have used a sword in battle. Swordsmanship has reached level 2. Your use of the Shivering Curse has increased your proficiency. Shivering Curse has reached level 6. Your use of the ritual Commune with Spirits has increased your proficiency. Commune with Spirits has reached level 4. You have used Bone Armor to defend yourself from harm. Bone Armor has reached level 3. You have experienced the world through the eyes of your minions. Minions' Sight has reached level 4. You have raised minions and they have fought on your behalf. Necromancer has reached level 20. You have received +6 intelligence, +3 wisdom, +3 constitution and +3 manipulation. Your patrons are most amused by your struggling. They continue to watch you and each other with eager eyes. Name: Tyrant Steelum. Age: 18. Race: Human, level 14. Class: Necromancer, level 20. Subclasses: Anathema, level 10. None. None locked. Racial feats: level 5. Steady Hand, level 10. Night Owl. Attributes: Strength, 12. Dexterity, 11. Constitution, 52. Intelligence, 75. Wisdom, 37. Willpower, 36. Charisma, 16. Manipulation, 29. Poise, 13. General skills: Arithmetic, level 5 right parenthesis max. Handwriting, level 5 right parenthesis max. Concentration, level 5 right parenthesis max. Cooking, level 3. Sling, level 3. Swordsmanship, level 2. Sneak, level 3. Butchery, level 5 right parenthesis max. Skill selections available: 3. Necromancer skills: Corpse Appraisal, level 10 right parenthesis max. Corpse Preparation, level 10 right parenthesis max. Death Magic, level 8. Bone Mending, level 5. General spells: Globe of Light, level 5 right parenthesis max. Sleep, level 5 right parenthesis max. Magic Bolt, level 5 right parenthesis max. Necromancer spells: Raise Dead, level 10 right parenthesis max. Bone Stitching, level 10 right parenthesis max. Commune with Spirits, level 4. Shivering Curse, level 6. Death Blades, level 5. Bone Armor, level 3. Minions' Sight, level 4. Anathema spells: Pierce the Veil, level 4. Appeal to the Court, level 2. Dark Communion, level 1. Suppress Mind, level 4. Repository, level 2. Fear, level 3. Necromancer feats: Skeleton Focus 2. Magic Battery I. Anathema feats: Repository. Wall of Thought I. Mysteries. Spell Shaping: Int +3. Wis +3. Words of Power: Wis +3. Char +3. Necromancer level 20. Choose 2 from skills or spells. Spells: Shorten Raise Dead, a modified version of Raise Dead that is quicker to cast. Bewildering Curse, disorient and confuse those affected. Flesh Mending, repair dead flesh. Death Bolt, improve Magic Bolt to utilize death magic. Cloud of Death, create a cloud of death magic that will invigorate and heal your minions slowly over time. Skills: Flesh Crafting, mold flesh as clay. Empower Servant, feed mana to your minions. Undead Control, better control of minions. Flesh Joining, connect multiple bodies together. Minion Commander, better coordination of many minions. Ghost Speech, better able to interact with spirits. Spirit Finding, a sense of where to find baleful dead. Necromancer level 20. Choose a feat from the following. Low light vision, increase the ability to see in poor light conditions. Death Sense, sense the presence of nearby death magic. Grave Cloak, hide more easily in dark environments. Magic Battery 2, increase the natural capacity for magic. Skilled I choose 2 general skills to increase the maximum level from 5 to 10. Class Focus I choose an additional Necromancer spell or skill. Efficient minions. I allow your minions to require less magic to move. Death Eater. Consume death magic. Zombie Focus. I improve the quality of raised zombies. Tyrant pumped a fist in triumph. He'd done it. Not only had he been able to max corpse preparation and appraisal, he'd also pushed bone stitching and raised dead to the maximum as well. His final push had paid dividends after all. The surge of glee was immediately followed by a faint aftertaste of bitterness. Had he been free to experiment and take his time, he had no doubt he would have been able to raise death magic to level 10, along with other ancillary skills and spells that may have opened up interesting options. Have to be satisfied with what I have. I've done far better than expected given the circumstances. Celebrate. And he had. He'd managed to master each of the core skills to the fullest extent possible in his initial class. This was the minimum benchmark to achieve a decent progression, and he'd done it. How'd it go, kid? Dove asked, his voice tense. I got it, the necromancer confirmed. Fuck, yes. Nice going, kid. Congratulations, you're said. Alright, sort out your level 20 shit, and then we can get to the real deal. He nodded and turned back to the page. There were a few new options to go over. He had to pick a feat, and 2 new ability selections. This would be his last opportunity to pick new spells and skills from the base Necromancer class. Anything he let go here he may never see again, so he had to be careful. There were several new options, as well as old ones that were of interest to Tyron. First he turned his attention to the new entries. He gained 2 new selections at level 18, and another 2 at level 20. These 4 were Cloud of Death, Minion Commander, Ghost Speech and Spirit Finding. It was interesting that right at the end he would be offered 2 new spirit-related skills. He felt that if he chose these, he might be offered a spirit-focused advancement, but he wasn't that tempted. Cloud of Death was interesting, though he feared it may prove too energy-intensive. Creating any sort of ambient field of magic would doubtless be a huge drain on his reserves. Am I ever going to be offered something cheap? Likely not. It might well be worth taking the spell now, in the hopes that he would be able to someday remedy his magic economy. But that could be risky. Tyron would be better served by something that would pay off now, and provide further dividends in the future. Minion Commander appealed to Tyron for this reason. The core of the Necromancer class was the minions, and he knew he should do everything he could to improve and empower them. He'd had many discussions with Dove on the subject of staying true to the core of his vocation, trying to turn himself into a pseudo-mage with as many flashy spells as possible would only make him a crap mage and a mediocre necromancer. Anything that directly related to improving his undead was a solid choice in his eyes. For a change, the skill seemed relatively self-explanatory. Mentally directing the skeletons was an imprecise art, and any assistance he could gain from the unseen would be welcome. Undead control spoke to the same need. If being better able to control large numbers of minions would be good, then so would being able to better direct smaller groups, especially if he became able to create more complicated and potent servants. Being able to extract every drop of power from such creations would be crucial to his success. He confidently placed a thumb mark next to Minion Commander and Undead Control, and moved on to his feet. He'd basically already decided he was going to choose Magic Battery 2. The only thing that might have dissuaded him from that choice would have been another skeleton mastery feat appearing, but none did. It was clear going forward that his spells would require huge reserves of magic. His intelligence continued to rise far above his other attributes, and along with it his capacity, but more was more. It was likely he would never be able to have enough. He confidently placed another thumbprint next to Magic Battery 2, and carefully checked his choices. Satisfied, he nodded to himself and then ended the ritual. He felt the changes begin to take place, the power and knowledge flowing into him as they always did when the ritual came to a close, except this time, something was different. The ritual didn't end, instead, the page passed. Tyron shook off the malice that gripped him as a result of the unseen's hand. He had more to do. He leaned forward and placed his hand on the page once more. Again, the blood was pulled from his veins and onto the page, as more words took shape. When it was done, he swallowed thickly and leaned forward to read. "Come on, kid. What have we got?" Dove demanded. "Necromancer has reached level 20. Select a class advancement from the following. Necro Acolyte. Delve deeper in the mysteries of the Necromancer. That's the generic nonsense you always get, Dove said dismissively. We should be able to get something more specialized. Skeleton Master, an expert of bone-based undead. Like that, Dove noted with satisfaction. This will likely give you access to more powerful varieties of skeletons, and perhaps give you those juicy Skeleton Master 3, and even IV as well. Necromancer Spirit Tuner, one who invites the spirits and commands them. Tyron frowned. He didn't think he'd be offered anything spirit-related, probably just because your commune with spirits spell reached a certain level. It sounds interesting, but holy shit, these descriptions are garbage. It's like this for every class, but they usually have the benefit of drawing on years of documentation. You, on the other hand, are running blind. Undead Weaver: an expert in the creation of minions. Oh ho, Dove noted with interest. I think this is the one you've been offered for mastering the basic skills. These sorts of classes usually focus on improved fundamentals. Horde Initiate, a master of larger gatherings of undead. My guess is you were offered this one due to having a certain number of minions under your command at once. Pretty obvious this is a quantity over quality direction, which wasn't what Tyron was interested in. He wanted the best minions possible, and then to try and find other ways to increase the number he could maintain. Dark Ritualist, one who delves into hidden magics. I'd say this is just from having access to several rituals with sufficient levels, Dove surmised. Another sideways advancement. Anything that depended on the levels he gained in anathema rituals wasn't something Tyron wanted to pursue. Well then, what do you think you want to pick? Chapter 73. Tyron thought seriously for a time before he replied. Some of them we've discounted. Acolyte is the generic choice, and I think we can safely dismiss that. As I said, sometimes these generic choices are the right ones. We can assume that picking this will advance you down the path you're currently on. You'll get the option to summon new undead, more feats along the line of what you've already seen, options to upgrade existing skills, all that shit. Maybe fatter zombies. You know how I feel about zombies. Tyron tried not to sound elitist. It wasn't that zombies were bad, per se, but he just felt they were inferior. Why not make a skeleton out of that body? They were tougher, faster, stronger, and didn't stink to high heaven. He knew exactly why. Zombies were quicker and dirtier to create. A slaughtered village could be turned into a mass of shambling horrors in a relative flash. To make his preferred minions, a lot of labor was required to butcher and stitch them, a waste of time to a necromancer who wanted fast levels. Yeah, you hate the fleshy types, all about bony boys. Well, I have good news for you. Skeleton Master sounds like it's right up your alley. Would it actually be worth it? Tyron pondered. I do prefer skeletons to the other undead I've had the option of creating so far, and since I already have skeleton mastery feats, I'll always want to make them a focus of mine. But does that mean I want to take this class? It might narrow my options too much. He wouldn't care if he could no longer progress by summoning zombies, but if he couldn't create anything other than skeletons, he might be limiting himself. I don't think you'd have no variety, Dove mused, but you would definitely have less. There are stronger types of skeleton than just the basic junk you've been running around with, and I don't doubt that this class would give them to you eventually. The necromancer could remember a few things he'd read in his parents' manuals on different sorts of undead. In terms of skeletal varieties, he could only recall revenants and licks as being distinct from basic skeletons. A revenant was essentially a spirit bound into the remains, similar to Dove's situation right now, except with complete control of the whole body. A lick was something else entirely, essentially a mage who had turned themselves into an undead in order to avoid death. There was only one way for Tyron to make one of those, and he wasn't particularly keen on the idea. He quite liked his flesh, thanks very much. Besides, if he wanted to become an unliving nightmare made manifest, he had an option to hand. Whether vampirism or liquid was the preferred method of eternal life, he didn't want to consider. 0 steps down that path was the correct number of steps. More potent varieties of skeleton were certainly a powerful draw to Tyron. He was so proficient at making them already, having invested time and effort to improve at bone stitching and butchery. In terms of short-term power, this was undoubtedly the best choice for buffing up his minion options. When it came down to it, the short term might be all he had. Is it really necessary to trap a spirit in order to create a revenant? He asked. I don't want to enslave the spirits of the dead to create my minions, "Oh, you don't, do you? Funny. I never noticed," Dove retorted sarcastically. "Can you just answer the question?" "Fine." Under protest. "In short, I don't fucking know. Knowing about undead is not the same as knowing how to make them. Revenants are certainly a step up from basic skeletons, though much more feared and able to utilize aspects of the unseen in a limited capacity. Like using skills and abilities. In a very minor way. Even that is enough to put them way higher than your regular troops over there. If those advantages don't come from a living spirit, then I have no idea where you'd get them. If his minions were actually able to utilize simple skills, such as swordsmanship, they would become far more deadly. The prospect was enough to excite the young mage, but not enough to wipe away the negative association he had with enslaving the dead. He may eventually be put in a place where he had no choice but to engage in such practices if he wanted to progress. But he hoped not. He thought of the stone in his pack, and then wrenched his thoughts away. It was this line of thought that leaned him away from Spirit Tuner. It would likely be a powerful option, giving him immediate access to ghosts as minions, or at least quickly, until he could reconcile the practice with his morals. Though, he would rather avoid it. Besides, if he stepped over the line and began to perform tasks that others would see as truly immoral and unforgivable, then what path back to society remained for him? It was a narrow thread of hope that he clung to. He knew there was almost no chance he would ever be accepted, but he refused to let it go. He needed that hope. He was dangerously close to losing it already. He thought of what was hidden in his pack, but wrenched his thoughts away. He had to focus. Horde Initiate and Dark Ritualist were both dismissed after little consideration. It was impractical for him to run around with a huge number of minions anyway, let alone difficult for him to secure that many remains. Quality over quantity had been Tyron's necromancer motto from the beginning, and he wasn't going to change now. As far as the ritualist went, he wasn't interested in sending his class down a sideways path like that. There was no point pursuing a different aspect of his magic than the one he was on. He'd already poured everything he could into improving his minions. It would be a massive waste to throw away those gains and focus on something else. Which left the Undead Weaver. This was what he had unlocked for mastering the basic skills. I know what you're thinking, kid. Skeleton or Weaver? With the lack of information we have, the choice basically boils down to power now, or power later. My guess is that picking the Bone Master will give you access to a spell or skill that would immediately improve your skeleton creation. I don't know what it would be: bone hardening, bone stiffening, rigid bones, glory bones, except only effective in the morning. You done? I've got more. Pass. Fine. Weaver is more likely to boost your initial skills, building up a firmer foundation, and then possibly give you access to similar abilities as the other classes. But further down the line, a strong foundation is what all the best slayers have. Magnan laughed. Having swordsmanship at level 30 might not be as sexy as 10 levels in legendary dervish style or some bullshit, but it's 10 times as effective. People chase the flashy stuff way too early. It's a classic mistake. As long as you progress, the flashy stuff comes on its own in time. Running after it is a complete waste of time. Undead Weaver Tyrant stated confidently. You sure, kid? Dove queried. Positive. All right, stick a paw print on that sucker and get ready. Ready for what? You'll find out. You're smiled. Not sure what they were on about. Tyron swallowed and pressed his bloody thumbprint next to the Undead Weaver entry on the status page. Then he ended the ritual. At once, a sensation he had felt before swept over him. He was pulled from his body and into the endless void of darkness and light once more. The awakening. The voice of infinity spoke to him once more. Was it the gods? Or did the words come from the unseen itself? Tyron Steelum, you have dedicated yourself to the pursuit of your dark craft, and have chosen to pursue it to perfection. Your embrace of the necromancer path shows your class was no error. Control you desire, and control you shall have. You are ascending. +10 to all stats. You are able to advance mysteries to the next stage. You have received the class, Undead Weaver. A seeker of perfection, the Undead Weaver is an expert crafter of the minions for which they are feared. To advance, create undead, have them fight in your name, and improve your craft. Class attributes per level. Strength +1, Constitution +2, Intelligence +3, Wisdom +1, Willpower +1, Manipulation +1, Poise +2, The maximum skill limit of Raised Dead has been increased to 20. The maximum skill limit of Corpse Preparation has been increased to 20. The maximum skill limit of Corpse Appraisal has been increased to 20. You have been granted the skill Minion Modification. This allows you to change and improve undead that have already been created. The knowledge flooded into his mind, then he was slammed back into his body. Every inch of him burned, physically and mentally. He groaned slowly and slumped forward. It's fucking wild, right? Dove chortled. In the ruins of Woodsedge, Beery looked out over what remained of the former frontier town from atop the city wall, at least atop a stable piece of it. When the Riftkin had come through the area, they hadn't bothered to use the gates. Enormous gaps had been smashed through the town's defenses by the big critters, allowing the smaller ones to run rampant throughout. After all this time, one might have thought the signs of conflict would have faded, but they were still there to see for someone with an experienced eye. Some bleached bones, picked over by wildlife, were scattered here and there. Dark, rust-colored stains that some might mistake for dirt, or soot Beery knew to be blood. Many had died in the catastrophe here, too slow to escape the oncoming horde. She struggled to bring herself to care. Impatient, she tapped her foot on the wall as she looked into the distance. The trees were still thick enough to block her eyes, but to her arcane senses, the rift was as clear as day. The energy there still swirled chaotically. One realm smashing into another tended to have that effect. Yet it was much subdued compared to what it would have been as little as a week ago. The magic unleashed in the collision had dispersed now, returning the rift to a normal state. Although it would never go back to exactly what it had been before. After the break had occurred, the rift would be wider. More powerful kin would be able to squeeze through. One step closer to this world falling into the abyss, just as the others had. What's taking him so long? She muttered under her breath. There was a twitch at the edge of her senses, and she huffed. By the time the breath had passed her lips, Magnan stood next to her on the wall, a broad grin on his face. You're looking as beautiful as when I last saw you, my flower, he said. That was 5 minutes ago, she replied. That explains it then, he said, rubbing thoughtfully at his chin. Beery rolled her eyes. Enough of that. Did you see it? Of course I saw it. What do you think I was doing over there? And Magnan gestured indifferently. It's wider. Of course it's wider. What the hell did they think was going to happen? You have a break, the rift gets wider. How much wider? I think was the question they wanted answered. Beery rolled her eyes. Her husband, as usual, was being deliberately obtuse. I've got the readings, he said, rolling his shoulders. Lowe's quote, when the Rocklaw catches up with us, I'll be able to send them back. He cast his eyes down across the ruins of the town. His expression hardened. This didn't need to happen, he said. Do you feel guilty? Beery asked him. He looked at her, a brow raised. No. Should I? Of course not, she scoffed. But I wanted to make sure. You often get the wrong idea stuck in your head. Worry not, my dearest. I save all of my loathing for those who deserve it rather than myself. Beery nodded, satisfied, before her eyes grew misty. Tyron was here, she said quietly. I can sense his magic. What? Magnan panicked. Do you think he made it out? He was here after the break. I can tell. That's a relief. Beery wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. I want to see him, Magnan. I want to see my boy. The swordsman stepped forward and embraced her gently. We can't do that. You know we can't do that. Not until the end. I know, but it's hard. Of course it is. It was your idea. They remained like that for several long minutes, balanced atop the wall around Woodsedge. It'll start again tomorrow, Beery said, freeing herself and wiping her eyes. She looked up into Magnan's eyes, letting him see the steel in her own. It's been a nice vacation, he grinned. I was almost starting to miss getting tortured. How long can we hold on this time? He shrugged. A couple of weeks. Maybe. I think they'll go harder this time. The powers that be want this mess done and dealt with. They've run out of patience. They'll get their wish. I just hope they come to regret it. Magnan laughed. Of course they will. We made sure of it. Chapter 74. The skeletons moved with their usual lack of alacrity as they fought. Eerie silence surrounded the minions, advancing and cutting down the Riftkin, without any utterance leaking from their glowing skulls. Tyron was used to it by now, but every now and again, he was reminded of just how spooky his undead were in battle. No doubt this had served him well against the bandits. The former farmhands would never have seen, let alone fought anything so unnerving in their lives. Against more determined and experienced foes, it wouldn't make a difference. Against infuriated monsters like the kin, it made no difference at all. Arms folded, he watched as the skeletons struggled to pin down their more maneuverable foes. The smaller creatures from the rift were no real threat to his minions, and the minor damage they managed to inflict could now be repaired with bone mending. But the undead still struggled to keep up. Tyron watched them fumble about until they finally managed to corner the last of them and stab it to death. He shook his head. Without his interference and aid, his skeletons were still relatively woeful fighters. If he didn't direct them with his thoughts, empower them with spells, or employ his magic on their opponents through his curse or by dominating their minds, they struggled even against creatures weaker than himself. And he was weak. Though, perhaps not as much as he'd been before. He looked down at his hands at his side and flexed his fingers into a fist. There was strength there now that he'd never experienced before. A flat +10 to every aspect of himself might not sound like much, but it represented a near doubling of some of them. He was stronger and quicker than he'd ever been before. Even if just a little bit, it helped to round out how lopsided he had become with his oversized constitution and intelligence. You're looking pensive, kid. Need to shit. I was just thinking about how different I feel after advancing. It's good, right? You might be a scrawny mage, but now you can walk up to any 17-year-old in the Empire and snap their arms like twigs. It's great for fighter types too. They get a little extra boost in the brain zone, so they aren't quite so completely fucking stupid all the time. I was also thinking about how weak my skeletons are. If I don't help them, they're pretty underwhelming. Underwhelming? You're being way too kind. They're complete trash. Even with your bone stitching at the level it is, they just aren't that coordinated. Nor do they think quickly. With enough numbers, they can surround stuff and club it to death, but that's about it. I was just hoping they'd be doing better by now. Tyron sighed. I've worked so hard to make them as well as I possibly can. It kind of feels like I've wasted my efforts. He was more than a little disheartened, to tell the truth. He'd been helping his undead in battle either directly or indirectly, sometimes directing them without being conscious of it ever since he'd begun his journey as a necromancer. Only now did he begin to think of what they might be capable of without him interfering on their behalf. Look, kid, you have done well with them. As far as undead go, the bony boys you've put together are good. Just try to keep in mind, you only just advanced for the first time. You are now officially the lowest rung, bottom of the barrel, useless hunk of dung type of slayer out there. You just walked out of the academy, thinking that you're hot shit, but everyone knows you're garbage. They're just too polite to say it. Thanks, Dove. Tyron said wryly. I'm just saying there's a long way to go. Wait until you see the feats, spells and abilities you get offered as you level up your new class. There'll be some good stuff in there, I promise. Not to mention, you need to get to figuring out new ways to assess and create undead. When those basic skills hit 20, your skelly boys will be a hell of a lot better than they are now. Still a long way to go. Abso-fucking-lutely. The young mage sighed and mentally gathered his 20 skeletons together. As they assembled around him, he pulled his coat a little tighter to protect against the biting wind. In the foothills of the western mountains, the weather was dismal almost all year round, and now was no different. Grey clouds hung low overhead, threatening to unleash a downpour that would no doubt soon begin. A freezing wind blew, whistling through the jutting rocks, and sending the long grasses to roll like an ocean in a storm. For a brief moment, he envied the skeletons and Dove for their lack of care toward the cold, but the feeling quickly vanished. Being able to feel wasn't a negative just because it was chilly. Liquid was not in his future, though he did idly wonder if vampires felt the cold. I don't think we're going to find much else, he sighed. Not many Riftkin made it this far. I probably haven't even killed enough to gain a level. Doubtful. It's slim pickings here, that's for sure. Do you think it's time to try and move to somewhere with a little more activity? Back to Woodsedge maybe? Tyron shook his head. Going back to the site of the break would be a disaster. More than a few slayers had seen him there, along with his minions, enough that surely someone survived. He didn't doubt they'd be looking for him there. Not that there are many options. It's not like rifts are around every corner and behind every door. There was another further south with an accompanying slayer keep, but the journey would take almost a week, and that would likely be the place they expected him to go. There were rumored to be unstable rifts in the mountains, though remote enough that no one had investigated. Until a rift grew strong enough to regularly allow the passage of riftkin, the Empire didn't bother with them. He could go looking in the mountains, except his complete lack of mountaineering would likely mean such an expedition would result in his own death. Nowhere to go except deeper into the province. Except he couldn't go there either, not until the Slayers and Marshals finished their sweep and went back to regular duties. He was frustrated, but he didn't have many options. Come on then, Dove. Let's head back. Why do you say that like I'm in any way involved? You are literally carrying me. You think I can choose to walk off into the night? I'm a skull. All right, fine. Be present as I walk back to the camp then. Why thank you. I refuse. I'm going to sleep. Gods damn you, Dove. But the light was already gone from those hollow eyes, as the once summoner retreated into the semi-aware state that passed as sleep for an undead. Tyron sighed heavily as he began to trudge back. The ground was muddy and the long grass wet, which made the walk perfectly distasteful. He would have enjoyed some conversation, but he couldn't really begrudge his friend the little control he had over himself. Talking or not talking, sleeping or not sleeping, those were the only options Dove had left to him now. Again, Tyron felt guilty for the position he had forced the man into. Dove hadn't asked for this cursed existence, and he'd tolerated it with remarkable patience, all things considered. They were well past the time that Tyron had promised he would release the trapped spirit, but he knew he'd be dead without Dove's help. He still intended to keep his promise and release him, but the time never seemed right. The necromancer sighed and rummaged in his pack, withdrawing something hard and round wrapped in a ragged cloth. Held in his hand, he beheld for a few long moments. I don't suppose you feel like talking. He trailed off. There was no response from the stone, and Tyron sighed again before he packed it away again. Probably for the best. I don't think you want to know where you're going. Circumstances were conspiring to trap him once again, and Tyron would kick and thrash as hard as he could to make sure that didn't happen. Without a safe way to progress, and with the plains too dangerous to traverse, he was stuck sitting in a cave, waiting until his time ran out. There was temptation to go hunting, as he had before. He could find more bandits and kill them, harvesting them for the materials he needed to create new minions, progressing his class through combat at the same time. Monty was still out there, along with the remnants of his bandit group. If anyone deserved death at the end of a skeleton's blade, it was that bastard. But he gave up on the idea. It was just too dangerous for him to be down there, but the lack of options left him feeling pressured. He was going to have to do something he didn't want to try and find a path forward. He could only hope it would be worth the price. The wrapped stone weighed heavily in his pack as he continued to trudge back. He could still remember, likely he would never forget, the night he got it. Tyron sat in the darkness after Elsbeth had left. Tomorrow, he would need to leave the farm and head into the wilderness again. Yor would be pissed. This backcountry collection of farmhouses was a shining beacon of civilization compared to the villages in the foothills, and for some reason, he got the impression she didn't much appreciate the rough conditions. Used to slightly better treatment was Yor. She'd have to deal with it, the same as he did. This would be a dangerous period, out in the wilderness. He leaned back in his chair, allowing his light spells to fade, and the darkness to enfold him. How had things gotten to this point? Cursed with a class he didn't ask for, he'd left hoping to carve out some space for himself, and now he found himself in the center of a cosmic tug of war he didn't know anything about. The Dark Ones, the Scarlet Court, the Abyss. He understood little about any of these factions, and yet they were powerful beyond belief, and each interested in controlling his fate. Why? Why did he matter so much? Was he just a pawn, expected to dance for their amusement? He gathered that they found his struggles interesting, a diversion to distract them from their eternal boredom. But was there something more? The questions frustrated him, and the only way to get answers meant giving things he wasn't prepared to give. What choice did he have? Of all the prices that had been asked, there was one he could pay, though he may be damned in the doing of it. Tyron closed his eyes and breathed. When he opened them again, a feverish light burned inside. Had anyone been there to see, they would recognize the look on his face as the same he'd had when Dove had been recreated as a skull. As the first hints of light began to creep over the horizon, Tyron stood before a baleful spirit, glaring at him from within its maelstrom of twisted energies. In one hand, he held a palm-sized stone, while the other hand was held nonchalantly at his side, a grin frozen on his face. "Nice to see you again, Davin," he'd said. "You live?" The ghost had rasped at him, cold fury and anger rising like steam from a kettle. "You didn't really think I'd be killed by more like you, did you, Davin? Your bones fought well, I must admit. How many of your own comrades did your skeleton kill, do you think? You will die soon, worm. You will enter this godless mist, and I will feast on your spirit." The smile faded from Tyron's features, but the mad light in his eyes did not dim. He hefted the stone in his hand. "I don't think that's going to happen," he said, barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry about this, Davin. I really am." "What are you saying? You threaten me when I'm already dead." Tyron looked down, then nodded. "It turns out there are worse places for a soul to be. Again, I'm sorry about this, but it's time we get you into your new home." The spirit screamed towards the end, but locked away in the rock by Tyron's ritual. There were none who could hear it. Chapter 75. "Kid, as much as I admire your colossal sack, I'm worried those same pendulous balls are blocking your vision like a hairy, wrinkled blindfold. This is not a good idea." In an unusual turn of events, I find myself agreeing with the Skull said. "There is too much risk involved. These are powers far beyond your ken. Perhaps one day, you will speak with beings such as these. But that day is far from this one." Tyron dropped the bag he was rummaging through and turned to face his companions, his brow creased with anger. "Then what do you expect me to do?" he said, voice sharp and hard. "I don't have unlimited time. Like you keep telling me, I have to rush. But how? Stuck in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to hunt, unable to move lest I'm caught. If I don't advance, then I'm as good as dead. But I can't do anything." It was unusual for Tyron to be this harsh, and it was clear even to Dove, who was gradually losing his eye for human emotion, that he was close to breaking under the pressure. Retreating to this cave and advancing his class had been a necessary step and an important milestone, but it had also been a trap. As the young necromancer had said, he was stuck. "I understand what you're saying, kid. I really do. But if you're going to take risks to get out of this situation, then I can suggest other, less dangerous alternatives. For example, run across the plains stark naked with a sign saying necromancer dangling from your rod." Yor glanced down at the skull. "Wouldn't he have to be as red and as hard as an ironwood staff?" "Yes. It'd be a challenge, but I think the kid would be up for it. He can rise to the occasion. If anything, the experience might harden him a little. Let him know that the real world won't let him slide in without resistance." "Is this funny to you?" Tyron asked, anger bubbling beneath his tone. "No, it's not fucking funny. You understand that what you're proposing is obscenely dangerous, right? My dead body is 100 kilometers away, and I still feel it edging toward the nearest door." The skull's eyes flashed with purple light. "I am dead serious when I say that trying to move across the plains and avoid capture is less risky than this. You should seriously consider it. Even if I managed to cross, where would I go?" Tyron asked tiredly. He'd considered this. He'd considered everything. This was his last choice, not his first. Options were dropping away by the hour like sand slipping through his fingers. If he managed to sneak past the slayers and marshals rolling out over the plains, he could then travel to another slayer keep and try his luck hunting stray riftkin. Except, it would simply take too long. Forget the difficulty of hiding his undead, both during the journey and after they arrived, or whether he would even have sufficient hunting to level up. He would never get there. His parents would eventually be compelled to get him. It was only a question of when. He had to act as if he had less than a month left. "Any other rift in the province is too far for me to reach in time, as well you know," he continued. "I don't have a choice. I'd rather not do this, believe me. But what else can I do? I'm not trying to align myself with the Abyss, but if I can negotiate somehow, they might be able to provide an answer that can help me. It's desperate, I know, but I am desperate. Without throwing myself to the old gods, or making myself a vampire, I don't see any other path to find a way out." He was clearly frustrated. Tyron didn't want to rely on the patrons in any way if he could help it. Yet circumstances kept driving him towards them. If any of the three would have information that could help him, it would be the Abyss, and with the spirit of Davin bound to the stone in his pocket, He had something he could use to pay for it. That wasn't his eternal servitude. My presence may help, somewhat Yor said, but it is far from an aegis of protection. The Abyss isn't known for its adherence to rules or etiquette. The entities you seek may rip you apart the moment they see you. But not you, Tyron asked, eyes sharpening. No, I have the means to protect myself even in that place. I would not risk eternity for you, Tyron. He grunted. That made sense. The vampire was happy to have him in her debt, but not so much she'd risk herself unnecessarily. He thought of how she had intervened to save him from the Dark Ones. She'd been afraid then, though she'd hidden it well. With her mistress's protection, Yor had been able to negotiate with creatures far beyond her in power. It was exactly that display that had convinced him his current course of action was possible. Good. I'm going to prepare the ritual. I'll be ready in 2 hours, then we go through. Is that really enough time for you? Yor asked, an elegant brow arched. Tyron nodded. Of course. I've performed this ritual before. I know how it works. Having said that, I have a few ideas on it. Dove, are you willing to help me go through a few things? Or are you going to sulk? By the right tits of the Holy Mother, kid, you really know how to try a person's patience. I'm dead and you still manage to piss me off. Yes, I'll help you. I just want you to know that I'm not happy about it. You're probably right about doing this, but by my own shiny bonehead, I don't like it. Fine. He strode over and picked up the skull. Let's get to work. For the following 2 hours, he bickered back and forth with Dove as he set to putting down the ritual circle. Multiple times, the former summoner sniped at him for his steady hand and perfect eye, even resorting to trying to distract him at key moments, much to Tyron's irritation. Despite his affinity for such tasks, he was still human. He was forced to make corrections several times, losing valuable time. Despite this, the circle was complete to his satisfaction within the time allotted. He still lacked the materials to do such work properly, so he'd drawn the circle in dust again, but at least this time, he had experience on his side. With his ritual focus and the modifications he'd made, he was confident he would be safe, particularly with Yor by his side. The vampire watched from the side as he cast the spell, a long and difficult process that required all the focus he could muster. When it was done, the break in the veil hovered before them, a perturbation in the air, as if a stone had been dropped in upon before him. Along with the rift came the voices, soft at first, pricking at his mind as they whispered their maddening truths. Tyron gripped his ritual focus in one hand, held before him like a ward, as the circle glowed bright beneath his feet. From the side, Dove watched as the rift began to leak pure darkness, limbs of twisting non-stuff pushing into a reality that was never intended to hold them. An abyssal. Even dead, Dove felt a shiver of fear in his soul. Such a creature was beyond dangerous, and he never wanted to be this close to one in his life, or afterlife for that matter. Fucking balls, he muttered, for lack of anything better to say. A frown creased Tyron's face as he fought off the voices, unable to see the danger creeping closer. Before the writhing tentacles found him, Yor was there, a hand raised, palm out, projecting a blood-red wave of light. The abyssal reacted the moment it was touched by that baleful glow. At first it retracted, like an animal prodded unexpectedly, jerking backwards into the rift. After a moment it came forward again, its uncountable tendrils drifting and waving towards the glow. She's communicating with it, Dove thought wonderingly. That shouldn't be possible. He looked at the vampire and knew, despite what he knew about her, which admittedly wasn't much, he hadn't thought highly of the society she purported to represent. She'd been big on promises, but hadn't delivered anything tangible in terms of magical knowledge or ability. But here, now, there was evidence of what she and by extension her people were capable of. The ability to navigate and commune with the abyss. It was staggering. Summoners would give their left hit and both nuts to hold such knowledge. What could they learn? What mysteries had they unraveled? He hungered to know. Recognizing the instinct in himself, he did his best to brush it off. He was dead, and would stay that way. If he became self-absorbed in his pursuit of magic, he would fail in the only reason he still remained on this plane. Helping the kid. I have secured passage, Yor said, snapping Tyron's eyes open. Are you ready? The young mage swallowed and nodded slowly, clearly still disturbed by the endless voices. Take me with you, Dove said suddenly. Tyron snapped his gaze down to the skull before he reached down and lifted it from his perch on a nearby stool with one hand. Change your mind? He asked his friend. Not really. But this is a chance to see something I never imagined I would. Also, I don't want to be stuck in a cave with a creepy tear through the veil of reality, hovering in front of me. Though he didn't want to say it, the necromancer was deeply comforted by Dove coming along. He took a deep breath and shook his head to clear it of whispers, then turned to Yor and nodded. "I'm ready," he said. She grinned suddenly, revealing her pointed fangs, before she turned toward the tear and began to walk through, projecting the red light in front of her as she went. As she advanced, the abyssal retreated, retracting its limbs back through the rift. The moment the vampire came into contact with the veil, her figure blurred, becoming indistinct and frayed around the edges, like a tapestry unraveling. Tyron swallowed and stepped forward alongside her. What he saw beyond the veil was nothing. Darkness, an utter and complete void that stretched to eternity. He shifted his head to look behind, and found he could see his own ritual, a slight tear in the boundless nothing, the flickering light of the cave beyond. The voices were louder now, insistent and urgent, flashing images and thoughts into his brain, spikes being driven straight into his thoughts. He growled and focused himself, using all of his mental discipline to force them away. Yor watched him with understanding in her eyes. "Not too late to turn back," she said. "No," he said heavily. "I'm fine. Let's continue." She nodded and turned back to the rift behind them. With one swift motion, she raised her wrist to her mouth and bit. From the wound, a stream of dark, pulsing blood began to flow, rising from her wrist and twisting through the air like a ribbon. Tyron watched, amazed, as the blood flowed in and around itself, whirling into a complex shape that wrapped around the rift, forming a shield of protection that glowed with power. "This will prevent any of the denizens of this place from being able to move through the tear until we return," she said. "Once they taste the freedom of the other side, they are seldom willing to give it up." "You don't fucking say," Dove remarked sarcastically, but Tyron could tell his heart wasn't really in it. Metaphorically speaking. "You okay there, Dove?" he asked. "This place is giving me the heebie-fucking-jeebies, kid. You don't understand just what we're looking at, otherwise you'd be right there with me. You think I'm not scared? At least you don't have the voices in your head." "True. They don't seem interested in the dead." "If you're quite finished chatting," Yor interjected, "we should advance. I cannot protect you forever." For the first time, Tyron noticed that she seemed weakened, a slight tremor to her movements, a tiny quaver in her voice. What she'd done for them was draining to her, massively so. "All right," he said. "How do we proceed?" "Simply walk. When we are far enough from the tear, that which you seek will make itself known to you. But it cannot approach a breach in the veil. To do so would damage it, and your world." "We walk. On what?" Tyron had no language to explain the place he found himself in. There was nothing to see, nothing to hear, and yet he could talk. He stood upon something, and out there, beyond the reach of the light that Yor created, he could sense them, the abyssals, circling them as sharks eyeing helpless prey. Their voices were audible, but muted, scratched at the edges, as if they spoke to each other from close, yet far away at the same time. His eyes swam whenever he tried to focus on anything at all, and always the voices, whispering, pushing. "I honestly cannot explain. Walk, and try not to think about it." And so they did. Shakily at first, they stepped away from the tear, which faded into the blackness behind them as they walked further out into the void. To help distract him from the voices, he engaged Dove in a hushed conversation about the abyss, though there was nothing new the summoner could tell him. When at last the tear had shrunk to almost nothing, Yor held up a hand, suddenly tense. Tyron froze, his eyes flicking uselessly around, meeting nothing but darkness on every side. And then the darkness moved. His mind creaked under the strain as it tried to process what continued to happen around him, yet failed. Dove was more articulate. "Fuck me," the skull rasped. The entity was enormous beyond comprehension. Larger than a mountain range. It enveloped them almost completely, only a small gap remained back to the tear. Yet he couldn't see it. There was nothing to see. Whatever it was, it gave off no light or sound. The abyss was a void, the place between places, where nothing existed. The being before them was that nothing made manifest, a terrible state made manifest. "It's listening," Yor breathed to them. "Produce your offering." Tyron stood transfixed, almost not hearing her. This had been a mistake. This was something that even the old gods deferred to. What had he really hoped to achieve here? Hand shaking, he withdrew the stone from a pocket within his coat and held it aloft. Such a pitiful offering, compared to the being in front of him. He could not feel more insignificant, more inconsequential than he did at this moment. This entity could smash the entire Western province with a stroke if it were able to touch it. The darkness around them stilled for a brief moment, then two things happened at once. First, the stone in Tyron's hand crumbled to dust that bled into the void and vanished, consumed. There may have been a cry, a wail of despair that reverberated around them, or perhaps not. The second thing to occur was a blast of searing pain that stabbed deep into the necromancer's mind. He threw his head back and screamed through gritted teeth as images burned themselves into his consciousness, too bright for him to comprehend. The agony was short-lived as he was unable to withstand it for long. Before the presence was done, he felt his legs give way as the pain receded and blessed oblivion embraced him. He awoke with a start to find himself inside the cave, staring up at Yor, who looked down at him solemnly, a hint of concern on her sculpted features. His head pounded, and he felt as if his blood crawled through his veins. "What you just did was remarkably dangerous," the vampire stated. "I hope you were able to gain what you were looking for." Tyron leaned back and closed his eyes. His entire body shook with relief or shock or fear. He didn't know. He'd been so stupid, and yet he hadn't failed. He nodded shakily. Somehow, the being had understood what he needed, in a way. In the back of his mind, knowledge burned, uncomfortably. Were he to lift a hand and point, he could precisely identify the location of Monty and his remaining bandits. Chapter 76. The countryside slowly rattled past as the cart followed a winding dirt track through the foothills. Tyron sat in his customary position toward the back, a femur held in his hands as he passed it back and forth, trying to focus his mind on it. He'd been this way for hours, and Dove was starting to get sick of it. "What crawled up your ass and died?" he demanded. What?" The young mage looked up, surprised. The skull that contained the summoner's spirit sat wedged between two bags of bones, so it didn't bounce around in the back of the cart, and Tyron found his glowing eyes frowning. "You've been sitting there squirming with a sour look on your face, not saying anything for hours. We both know what's bothering you. Let's talk about it. Let's flop it out and examine it in the true male tradition. Dove, you don't need to insert your dick into every situation. That's what my wife said." "Wait, you were married?" "No, not in the legal sense. Or the romantic sense. It doesn't matter. Stop trying to change the subject. Murder. We were going to talk about all the murder you're planning on doing." Tyron's features twisted, and he leaned forward to bury his face in his palms. "This is why I didn't want to talk about it," he groaned. "I was hoping to avoid thinking about it at least for a while." "Except you didn't avoid thinking about it, did you? Every time you tried to focus on that chunk of bone you got a look on your face like you were about to throw up." "That obvious, was it?" Tyron sighed. "It was even more obvious than that, if I'm being honest. I've seen slayers with dysentery that had a more placid expression than you had on. If the concept of murder is so disturbing to you, then why are we out here trundling about on the plains?" "You know why the necromancer grumbled. Explain it to me again, just for funsies, so I can get experience and resources to keep advancing my class." "So, your plan is to murder a bunch of people in order to empower yourself?" The mage lifted his head and set his jaw. "Yes," he said. As much as he might try to dress it up, that was what he was going to do. He could make an argument that the men he was planning to kill were terrible, evil, even rapists and murderers. They would be killed by the marshals eventually, once Annette and the others reported their experiences to the authorities. Did that make it right for Tyron to take the law into his own hands? No, not even close. Little by little, he could feel himself being chipped away. Only the day before, he had taken the spirit of a person, a human being, and offered it to an otherworldly creature in exchange for knowledge. Was it really a soul? Was it a psychic imprint on the ambient magic from the moment of death? Did it matter in the end? He refused to handwave his responsibilities away with weak justifications. The only way to face his actions and choices was head-on. Ultimately, all of the morality boiled down to a single question that he continued to ask himself every day. He'd asked it as he stood in the dark, stone in hand, preparing to conjure a spirit. He'd asked it as he looked into the abyss for the first time, and felt the madness imprisoned there creeping into him. He'd asked it as he stood, shovel in hand, over the open grave of a recently departed member of his own community. "Will you do this thing, or will you abandon your goals?" Was he willing to turn his back on all that he hoped to achieve to reach the heights his parents had achieved, to be a force for good in the world, and help turn back the tide of Rifkin that was slowly burying the realm in darkness? Or would he forge ahead against his own instinct, against what he thought was the right thing? It was wrong to hunt and kill human beings to empower himself. It was an unarguable fact. Yet he was going to do it anyway, because he would rather do that than abandon his hopes and dreams. Am I a selfish person, Dove? He asked. Yes, the response was immediate. A flicker of pain crossed through the necromancer's eyes. He'd known it, but it still hurt to hear it said. He liked to think he wanted power for the right reasons, but ultimately he still wanted it for himself. Kid, everyone who pursues the heights is a selfish piece of shit in this place. You have to be, really. Altruism is nice, don't get me wrong, it's great even, but any person who was able to scale the precipice and achieve those kinds of levels of personal strength is automatically selfish. The resources they had to expend to get there, the effort, the time, the energy, all of it could have been directed to another cause, but instead, it was devoted to the self. Your parents are a perfect example. Magnin and Beery do whatever the hell they want and always have. They've helped a lot of people. That's a byproduct of their search for freedom. You know that as well as I do. They've never murdered anyone. First, you don't know that. Slayers are asked to do all sorts of shit when they reach the top end. Roger had us hunt down criminals a few times. They didn't get a trial. Let me tell you now. Second, do you think they would have committed murder if it was the only way for them to grow strong? They would have. They wouldn't even hesitate. He didn't like to admit it. His parents were heroes in the eyes of the public, but he knew them better than anyone. The drive for adventure and freedom was all-consuming inside those two. They would have pushed for it at any price. I guess what I'm trying to say is, fuck Monty and those pricks. Heck, resurrect those assholes and murder them twice. Don't get all in your feelings over a gang of literal pieces of walking shit. I get what you're saying, but that doesn't make it right. Kid, Tyron, who fucking cares if it's right? Not this entrapped spirit, that's for sure. These guys need killing. You need levels and skeletons. It's winning all around. They didn't speak for a long moment as the cart continued to rumble forward. Eventually, Tyron broke the silence. Thanks, Dove. Without the support of the skull, he likely would have driven himself mad by now. He knew he was in the wrong, but at least he felt a little better about it. No problem. Now, rather than moping, hopefully, you can start doing a better job making sure the marshals aren't about to leap over the ridge and punch us in the face. I've been checking. Sure you have. Tyron sighed and worked his magic for a moment. When it was complete, his eyes flickered before being overtaken by vision from another source. Looking through the eyes of his skeletons, he scanned their surroundings before he dismissed the spell. Still nothing, he said. Those bony boys have shocking eyesight. You really think using them for your lookouts is appropriate? Unlike you, I don't have a spirit bird I can whip out to spy on things. Skeletons are what I have, so that's what I have to use. He had 4 out there now, moving carefully through the brush, while the rest of his minions pulled the cart. Every now and again, he would look through their eyes and see if anyone was drawing close. Out here on the plains, he was at constant risk of discovery by slayers and marshals. Hopefully they wouldn't care enough about these relatively empty places to search thoroughly for any stray kin. Which is why open quote, summoners are superior. Tyron sounded out along with him, rolling his eyes. Nice to see you agree. Now if you're finally in a good headspace, let's see if we can work on your new stuff. You mean my minion modification skill? Exactly. How does that even work? It was an interesting ability, albeit a powerful one. Tyron had never really considered the possibility he'd be able to make changes to minions that had already been created. Adjusting a ritual that had been enacted was very different from reforging a blade. A ritual was a complex magical construct with many moving, interlocking pieces. Sticking his hand in the middle and tinkering with it was, generally speaking, bad for the ritual, and not great for his hand either. Except in this metaphor, the hand would be his mind. Yet this new skill enabled him to do just that. It was remarkable. It's weird. It's like I can peel back layers of a minion and work on them before patching it all back together. I've only attempted it a few times. It's such a strange sensation. I can even start to unravel their bone weaving and change sections. The skull absorbed this information. I don't think you understand how powerful that skill is going to be in the long run. Having undead lagging way behind your current standard can get you killed. Not to mention the insane efficiency gain. You'll go through less remains to maintain a full contingent of your best minions. And you don't even need to find remains to practice your skills. Tyron frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if you want to work on your raised dead, for example, you can bring over one of the bone crew and start poking at the ritual. It might even give you insights you wouldn't otherwise get being able to modify it after it was cast. That was true. Tyron hadn't really considered it that way. He quickly ordered one of his skeletons to approach and watched as it awkwardly climbed into the back of the cart amidst the bags filled with bones. Workaholic Dove sniffed. The young mage grinned as he got to work, beginning to extend his magic and examine the conduit that lay between the skeleton and himself. Being able to make modifications as it functioned was an incredible opportunity, and he wasted no time in starting, as he commented back and forth with his friend. Despite how engrossing the magic was, in the back of his mind, the locations of the remaining bandits burned like candles. No matter what he did, it was impossible for him to truly dismiss them from his thoughts. They weren't that far away. He'd likely run into a few of them tomorrow. A group of 6, or perhaps 7, had broken off from the main group and appeared to have settled somewhere close to the foothills. Spectacularly unwise. Chapter 77. There were more candles burning than the night before. When Tyron had gone to sleep, he'd estimated there to be close to 20 of the small flames alight in the back of his mind. When he awoke, that number had grown. By how much was difficult to say. Many of the candles flickered so close to each other that determining an exact number was impossible. Even so, he was certain it had grown. That meant Monty had not yet given up on his twisted ambitions. He was recruiting. The thought of the chubby, plain-faced farmhand despoiling even more families filled Tyron's chest with anger until he felt it would boil up his throat. Why weren't the Slayers and Marshals doing anything? Had they still not reached this area? If that was the case, they were dragging their feet, moving well behind the timetable he'd expected from them. As a result, the people suffered. His skeletons moved with silent precision as he actively directed them with his thoughts. The isolated farmhouse wasn't much to look at, far less prosperous than the 4 farmsteads they'd assaulted in the past. This area was even more remote, the land less fertile and more difficult to work. Judging by the size of the building, it was unlikely more than 4 or 5 had lived there. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating a well-tended fire burned inside. As close as he was, Tyron could hear muffled voices from within, punctuated occasional bursts of raucous laughter and banter. Some part of him hated these men, the callous disregard for others, the brute, thuggish enforcement of their will against the helpless. They were everything his parents had taught him not to be. The necromancer fueled that anger, funneled his emotions in the kiln, until it burned hot and righteous. He needed that fire to do what had to be done to take the next step. He was the aggressor this time. Self-defense didn't come into it. It was incredible how much of a difference each skill made. The combination of minion commander and undead control allowed him to direct the movements of his 20 skeletons, like a conductor did his musicians. It was as if he were forming patterns in his mind, lines for the skeletons to move along. No longer did they crowd into each other, or even get their swords tangled in each other's ribs, which had happened a few times, much to his embarrassment. They moved equally distant from each other, and his mental commands shifted smoothly from one to the next. This was most definitely something he needed to raise as high as possible. He hoped it still worked as well when he had a larger horde of undead. What would it feel like to direct an army of thousands like this? He could scarcely imagine the thrill of it. Unwilling to expose himself, Tyron remained crouched by the wall, his eyes narrowed to the point of almost being closed. As he subtly wove his magic, he peered through the eyes of his skeletons as they wrapped around the humble building, poised beside windows, hunkered down next to doors. With their silent movement, and having been manipulated to remain out of sight, the undead crept into position unnoticed. Without even realizing it, the bandits had been enveloped in a skeletal fist. If he were to cast any of his more powerful support spells, the men inside were sure to hear him. So Tyron refrained, instead directing his minions to approach the front door. So fine was his ability to command them, he could even direct a skeleton to step forward and grasp the door handle as he looked through its eyes. In one smooth motion, the skeleton pulled the door open with force and charged forward, followed closely by 10 of its fellow servants. Seen through the blurred view of a skeleton, the inside of the house was even more of a mess than it would have seemed under normal circumstances. It had been ransacked, the cupboards kicked in, food trampled underfoot, pieces of furniture scattered across the floor. The men who sat in a loose circle around a fire pit in the center of what had once been a humble dining area, passing a half-empty bottle between each other, weren't much better. Disheveled and unwashed, they appeared to have gone half wild, knotted hair and ripped clothing, giving an animalistic cast to their appearance. That rage boiled up in Tyron's throat once more, threatening to choke him. He grimaced outside the building, his teeth clenched to hold it in as he directed his skeletons forward. The bandits snatched up weapons as they scrambled to rise to their feet, but they were much too slow. With his new abilities, it was trivial for Tyron to order his servants forward efficiently, dividing the skeletons between the 7 targets. Swords thrust forward or fell down in crude overhead chops, cutting into flesh. Fresh blood sprayed as the bandits cried out in pain, the splatter little more than a purple haze in the eyes of the skeletons. Only a few managed to rise to their feet unharmed, but Tyron was ready for them, rotating skeletons from the wounded targets to overwhelm the others. One skeleton swung in a wide arc from right to left, forcing the former farmhand to block to the side, while another undead stepped forward with a stab directly to the chest. In moments, the fight had gone out of them. Taken completely by surprise, they'd been overwhelmed in an instant. 2 leapt out the windows, smashing through the wooden shutters, only to land at the feet of waiting minions. Others surrendered, clutching at their wounds with one hand as they attempted to keep the life from seeping from their bodies. The other raised in the air, dropping their weapons to the floor. So easy, too easy. It shouldn't be this simple to kill. Yet here he was. Strange to think that a small group of normal people was simply no threat to him anymore. Their skills and stats were so much less useful in battle than his own. Even if these men had been prepared for his arrival, he still would have overwhelmed them by adding his own magic into the mix. Only slayers or higher-leveled marshals could fight him now. This was the progress he'd made after the suffering and effort he'd put in. Despite the surge of pride he felt, he was all too aware of what even one slayer at the same level as himself would do to him. A swordsman at level 20 would carve through his skeletons as if they weren't even there, moving with preternatural speed and grace. In fact, such a fighter could probably ignore the undead altogether. Stronger and faster, they could home in on him and cut his head from his shoulders, and there was precious little Tyron would be able to do about it. Something for him to consider in the future. Countermeasures had to exist, though he wasn't sure what they might be. For now, he had 7 human lives to deal with. "Lie down on your bellies," he shouted through the wall. "Keep your hands away from your weapons." He had to repeat himself twice to be heard over the begging and cursing. Soon each bandit lay helpless, a skeleton pressing a blade into their backs, as the others collected the simple arms they'd gathered. Hatchets, crude cudgels and various other farm implements. Only one had a proper weapon, a Morningstar of basic make. It would be a good weapon for a future minion, since the skeleton's lack of coordination wouldn't matter as much. Perhaps the bandit would be able to keep using it in the next phase of his existence. Tyron pulled his thoughts away from that grim thought. With the situation in hand, he stood and made his way around the building and in through the door. The bandits lay bleeding, cursing, one of them sobbing, with his skeletons stood over them. As he entered, they began swearing, threatening and begging in equal measure, voices filled with rage and despair. They truly were a pathetic sight. He realized then it had been a mistake to come inside. Seeing them for himself made it all the more difficult to do the next part. He worked to stoke the heat of his anger, hoping his outrage would help him do what needed to be done. Yet the more he tried to feed the fire, the colder he became. All his emotions and doubts felt burned away, leaving nothing behind. His foot lashed out as he kicked one of the bandits in the leg. "Get up," he said. "I'll talk to you outside." At his mental command, 3 more skeletons entered and watched the man as he came to his feet. Wary of any desperate attacks, Tyron kept his distance as the hollow-eyed, gaunt figure was marched from the small home, with several blades poking him in the ribs. Easy there, you fucking walking bones. I'd like to keep my ribs on fire inside, unlike yourselves. Not likely. Once they were outside, Tyron sized up the bandit more carefully. He was clearly at the end of his tether. The pants he wore had been sturdy, workman's gear at one point, but now they were tattered, torn in several places, frayed all over and with no sign of repair. His attire told a tale of a man on the edge. Life must have been a little rough since they lost their little slice of paradise. Likely this was why these 7 had broken away from the main group. The situation was getting more desperate this far west. Marshals and slayers still hadn't arrived to restore order. There was little to no trade, and supplies were growing thin. Not for the first time, Tyron was grateful he didn't have to feed his minions anything other than magic. Yor was also blessedly low maintenance, though he worried often if people in nearby communities were vanishing into the night. I'm not sure if I recognize you, Tyron said. You didn't happen to try and storm a farm recently. Left a good number of your friends behind, dead on the ground. The bandit eyed him warily. Mage, I was there. You don't seem all that angry about seeing me again. The man shrugged. I figure we deserve it, after what we done. Monty was saying we could live free after, but I wasn't sure. You feel bad for what you've done? Tyron asked, a little surprised. The bandit slumped forward, his eyes devoid of emotion. Don't matter now. Just as kill me and be done, mage. I don't got nothing to say. There's quite a bit you can tell me. The only real question is how much work I need to put in before I get my answers. You can talk to me while you're alive, or we can carry on this conversation after you're dead. Which would you rather? His captive's face paled as he took in his words. You can't do that. You can't take my soul. I'd rather not have to, Tyron said honestly. Tell me what I want to know about Monty, and you'll get a clean death. Refuse, and I'll be forced to compel your spirit to talk. It turns out that the idea of being interfered with after death was rather disturbing to most people. Even if the bandit was resigned to the fate of his remains being converted to an undead, he was far more opposed to the idea of Tyron binding his spirit in any way. There wasn't much to be learned about Monty and his gang. After being defeated by Tyron, they'd retreated in disarray, fighting amongst themselves, losing several members as their bickering escalated. Ultimately, Monty had retained his leadership and directed the rest to find new targets. These 7 had broken away to try and find a more out-of-the-way place, where they could lay low, and hopefully avoid the consequences of their actions. Tyron didn't bother asking what had happened to the families who had lived here, and his captive didn't volunteer the information. There was no need to say it out loud. When he was done, Tyron turned and walked away as his skeletons raised their blades at his mental command. He could still hear the screaming, despite the distance he put between himself and the house. At least, mercifully, it didn't last long. Chapter 78. It was difficult not to get to work on the remains straight away. For a moment, he had to laugh at himself. What had he become? No sooner had he finished killing 7 people than his fingers began to itch for his carving knife. He relayed the feeling to Dove when he picked up the skull, and his friend commiserated in his traditional fashion. You were always a creepy fucker. If anything, the necromancy has allowed you to truly express your true self. The love for carving human flesh was inside you all along. Shut up, Dove. Tyron rolled his eyes. I did not want to butcher people. I notice you said did not and not do not, you sick bastard. I can't create minions without getting at the bones, you idiot skull. Hey, no judgment here. I'm only surprised you didn't get straight to chopping. The necromancer blew out a breath along with his frustration. Dove was always difficult when he felt he needed to lighten the tension. I need to perform the status ritual, as well you know. With these 7 dead, along with the riftkin that I slayed, I might have enough for 2 levels. I can't create new minions until I see what choices I get. Well, hurry up and get to it, man. I might be dead, but I don't have endless patience. The first choices you get in a new class are usually pretty damn swish. A little reward for making it over the hump. What did you pick when you reached 22? I was able to make a new, more powerful spirit contract. Swimming the astral sea, looking for a creature that vibed with me, those were the days. Up to that point, all I had was my stupid bird. Don't get me wrong, he's awesome, but much less impressive than a kick-ass wolf who can eat riftkin for breakfast. I bet. How did you even level up with nothing but a hawk? The eyes of the skull flickered in amusement. Not all of us were on the run from the law, kid. I was in a mage academy, getting drunk, practicing magic and trying to get laid. Took me 2 years to settle my foundation and ascend my class. I didn't have to fight a riftkin until I'd reached level 24. Not directly, anyway. That sounds nice, Tyrant sighed. He certainly hadn't had that luxury. If you think all kin are the same as the little shits that you've fought so far, you're out of your mind, kid. Go through a rift and take a peek at the other side if you get the chance. You'll shit your dark, ominous robes inside a minute. I wouldn't doubt it. If that weren't the case, superhuman people like his parents wouldn't have had to spend all of their time traveling to hotspots, clearing rifts when the Slayers hadn't been able to keep up. If just anyone could do it, no one would need to scale the heights of power in the way they had. Hopefully something good comes up, he sighed. I need all the help I can get. I'm hoping for sexy ghosts. Tyron hesitated. He couldn't help it. Why would they be sexy? Exactly. Why in the name of all that is good and holy would you create an unsexy ghost? The young mage hung his head. He should have known not to ask. Of course he should have known. After all this time, how could he still be asking, expecting something other than complete nonsense? I'm going to perform the ritual. Don't speak to me until it's done, or ever again. You got it. Events? You have directed your horde with precision in battle. Minion Commander has reached level 2. You have coordinated the actions of your undead to great effect. Undead Control has reached level 2. You have experienced the world through the eyes of your minions. Minion Sight has reached level 5. You have enacted the ritual and gained knowledge of it. Pierce the Veil has reached level 5. You have used your abilities to make changes to already raised minions. Minion Modification has reached level 2. New undead have been created. Raised Dead has increased proficiency. You have applied your skills to assess and prepare the dead. Corpse Appraisal, Corpse Preparation have increased proficiency. Dark Magic has been used to create the undead. Death Magic has increased proficiency. You have raised minions and they have fought on your behalf. Undead Weaver has reached level 22. You have received +2 Strength, +4 Constitution, +6 Intelligence, +2 Wisdom, +2 Willpower, +2 Manipulation and +4 Poise. The Abyss welcomes your sacrifice even as it delights in the taste of your thoughts. The Scarlet Court is content with your progress, so long as you recall the favors you owe. The Dark Ones remain amused at your antics. For now, Anathema has reached level 11. You have received +2 Constitution, +2 Intelligence, +2 Willpower. Name: Tyron Steelum. Age: 18. Race: Human, level 14. Class: Undead Weaver, level 22. Subclasses: Anathema, level 11. None locked. Racial feats: Level 5. Steady Hand, level 10. Night Owl. Attributes: Strength, 24. Dexterity, 21. Constitution, 68. Intelligence, 93. Wisdom, 49. Willpower, 50. Charisma, 26. Manipulation, 41. Poise, 27. General Skills: Arithmetic, level 5 right parenthesis max. Handwriting, level 5 right parenthesis max. Concentration, level 5 right parenthesis max. Cooking, level 3. Sling, level 3. Swordsmanship, level 2. Sneak, level 3. Butchery, level 5 right parenthesis max. Skill selections available: 3. Necromancer skills: Corpse Appraisal, level 10. Corpse Preparation, level 10. Death Magic, level 8. Bone Mending, level 5. Minion Commander, level 2. Undead Control, level 2. Minion Modification, level 2. General Spells: Globe of Light, level 5 right parenthesis max. Sleep, level 5 right parenthesis max. Magic Bolt, level 5 right parenthesis max. Necromancer Spells: Raise Dead, level 10. Bone Stitching, level 10 right parenthesis max. Commune with Spirits, level 4. Shivering Curse, level 6. Death Blades, level 5. Bone Armor, level 3. Minion Sight, level 5. Anathema Spells: Pierce the Veil, level 5. Appeal to the Court, level 2. Dark Communion, level 1. Suppress Mind, level 4. Repository, level 2. Fear, level 3. Necromancer Feats: Skeleton Focus 2. Magic Battery 2. Anathema Feats: Repository, Wall of Thought I. Mysteries. Spell Shaping. Int +3. Wis +3. Words of Power. Wis +3. Char +3. Undead Weaver level 22. Choose an additional skill. Spirit Binding. Create minions from the spirits of the dead. Ghoul Flesh. Instill death magic into the flesh of the deceased. When he looked down at the paper and took in just how far he'd come, it was hard not to get emotional. It had been a struggle, and he'd had to fight for everything he'd achieved, but the results were there on the page. Officially, he'd be a bronze rank slayer if he didn't possess this illegal class. One of the superhumans responsible for defending the people from the rifts and fighting to maintain this world. He shook his head. I'll make it happen, he vowed to himself. Some way, somehow, I'll make it happen. His physical body had never been stronger or more durable than it was right now. Sadly, his flexibility and coordination remained rather pathetic. He wouldn't be beating anyone in a sword fight, but he could live without that. All he had to do was find ways for his undead to hold their own against other high-leveled individuals, and he'd never have to worry about fighting anyone hand-to-hand. His intelligence translated to a vastly increased pool of magic to work with and the mental muscle to wield it. His wisdom lagged behind, but not so far that it would be a detriment. His ability to handle his power had never been as fine as it had become now. He could handle far more skeletons now, perhaps as many as 40. The only thing holding him back was the need to move undetected on the plains. Too large a group would make discovery all but certain. Still, new options, new spells, new avenues to improve his situation. He'd been looking forward to seeing what the unseen would offer him, but he wasn't immensely pleased with what he saw. Spirit Binding. Ghost Minions. They would be useful, more than useful, but was Tyron really willing to bind the spirits of the dead into his service? Using the remains was fine, but this? He'd promised the last bandit he killed that he wouldn't use his spirit in any way. But the other option was even less palatable. Ghoul Flesh. There was only one type of undead that possessed flesh, and that was zombies. Infusing the flesh with death magic would likely have the effect of preserving it, or perhaps even strengthening it. Stronger, faster zombies, possibly a whole new type of undead in their own right. What have you got, kid? Dove asked. Tyron shared his options. Ghouls. Nasty buggers. Not really a zombie. They're a whole different thing. Faster, harder hitting, but more reliant on the integrity of their flesh than a zombie. So they're squishier. What about the other? What do you mean? It's spirit binding. It couldn't scream ghost any harder if it tried. The necromancer pulled a face. Don't give me that look, you ponce, Dove scoffed. Spirits are awesome. Invisible most of the time. They can float about and get into all sorts of shit. Right pain in the ass. Can they fight? I'm not sure about that. Just because I've seen undead doesn't make me a damned expert. If you had to guess. The skull sat silent for a moment. If you held a blade to my throat, I'd laugh at you, then say probably not. Spirits capable of causing harm, or at least severe harm, certainly do exist, but I think they'll be higher level than what you'll be offered right now. Why couldn't they just have given me a better form of skeleton? Tyron groaned. He'd had enough moral quandaries to deal with lately. He didn't need this on his head as well. He'd found the resolve to hunt down and kill the bandits to continue growing, though it had been difficult. Now was he really going to commit further and start enslaving spirits of the deceased? Stop being such a pansy about it, Dove rebuked him. You know as well as I do that the only sensible choice is the ghosts. You don't have the skills or feats to support flesh-based undead, and the spirits will fill in a niche that you need. With a few invisible ghosties spying for us, our chances of slipping through the plains undetected will shoot through the fucking roof. The former summoner was right. It was the obvious choice. That didn't make it any easier for Tyron to accept it. Look, negotiate with them or something. Give them a period of time they'll be bound and then release them voluntarily afterwards. Same as you've done with me, except you'll actually keep your promise. Dove, I will release you. Good, I'd be really pissed off otherwise. Does that soothe your conscience a little? Strangely enough, that did sound more palatable to Tyron. So I wouldn't keep them forever, just for a period of time. Basically, yeah, just say, hey, it sucks, you're going to be an undead ghost thing. Good news, I'll let you free after a year, and then go on with your day. It took a little longer for Tyron to convince himself this was a good idea. before he eventually placed his thumbprint next to spirit binding. As always, the inrush of energy from confirming the ritual left him breathless and lightheaded as the power of the unseen suffused him. New knowledge trickled into his mind, a new magical technique that would allow him to create a new type of servant. His love for magic was such that, despite his earlier misgivings, he already wanted to experiment with the new method. There would be a great deal to learn, slivers of knowledge that may be applicable in other places. His fingers itched. This also meant that with every bandit he killed, there existed the potential to create 2 minions rather than the one. The bones would of course be turned into a skeleton, but the spirit could now be used as well. Tyron destroyed the paper marked with his blood, and stood with a sigh. All right then, time to go have a chat with some pissed off bandit ghosts. Hey, you do you. I think I'll sleep. The light faded from the skull's eyes, leaving Tyron on his own. He huffed and picked up his friend before starting to trek back to the cart. It was never a good idea to dive into a new magic without some thought and preparation. So once he found the worn wooden transport, he rummaged in his pack for his book, and sat Dove on a corner post before returning to the building. The details of this new method were still sorting themselves out in his brain, and Tyron needed to put them more or less in order before he dared to use it. He ordered the skeletons to drag the corpses out of the building, and found a more or less clean chair to sit in and get to work. The new method was difficult. To utilize a spirit and turn it into an undead minion was something of a process. The subject needed to be housed in a shell before it could exist and operate as a minion, which was what this new ability did. He could use his magic to form an intangible housing, in which a spirit could be bound. Once completed, he would then be able to cast Raise Dead to create the conduit between the spirit and himself, and bind it to his service. Presumably, he wouldn't need to construct a nascent mind within the undead, since it would already have one, which meant he could likely abridge the ritual to exclude those parts. A thought for another time. Right, then he said as he put down his pen. He perused his notes one more time before he made his way outside to look at the 7 dead bandits on the ground. Well, I promised you that your spirit would be free from interference, so you're out. He turned to the other 6. But you guys are all fair game. To negotiate with the spirits, or tell them his conditions, more accurately, he would need to speak to them before he raised them. He rubbed his palms together. It was time for magic. Chapter 79. Blood and bones. That's cold. Tyron exclaimed as a shiver ran through his arm. He snatched the limb back from the edge of the cart and rubbed it vigorously, encouraging the blood flow, as he glared at the nothing on his right. Except it wasn't nothing, as well he knew. They got you again. Dove chuckled. Man, these guys really know how to hold a grudge. I'm not even certain they're doing it on purpose, Tyron muttered. They kind of drift in place when they aren't actively moving somewhere. They coincidentally happen to drift into you multiple times. Dove was skeptical. They shouldn't be able to act against me in any way. Part of the Raise Dead ritual builds and controls, so that they can't refuse orders, and can't harm me. Perhaps it doesn't count as harm if all they do is make you cold and piss you off. I'm not surprised they'd want to rebel given the circumstances. Imagine working for an honest living your entire life, and then getting enslaved by some fluffy chin punk after he murdered you. That's rough. The skull made a clucking sound as he mulled over the monstrous actions Tyron had committed. For his part, the necromancer stared hard at his friend, not rising to the bait. Describing the men as having worked an honest living their entire lives was too much even for the former summoner. These guys had been thieves, killers and rapists. No matter the reason, Dove continuously poked and prodded Tyron about his new minions, wheedling away, despite having convinced him to do it in the first place. Simply one of the ways the skull continued to be both a welcome companion and a total pain in the backside at the same time. Tyron ignored him for a moment and directed his thoughts toward the connection he shared with his undead. The 7 bandits he'd killed had been processed and would reach saturation in a few hours, after which he planned to raise them as skeletons. His loyal bone-centric minions were not what he had his mind on for the moment though. He was more interested in the other 6. As he engaged the mental connection they shared, he shuddered again at the strange, alien touch of those undead minds. The skeletons barely had a thought in their heads at all, so they didn't give this kind of feedback. A skeleton was almost like a magical construct, in a sense, one made using human remains. The mind was entirely artificial, and they were as pliable as wooden dolls, with no resistance or desires of their own. The ghosts were different. Bound by magic and chained by ritual, a crude facsimile of a human mind was contained within each. They didn't think clear thoughts, for reasons Tyron didn't quite understand. They lacked even the limited capacity to communicate they'd had in life. His current working theory was that the vessel, or container, that he had created was too crude an implement for their spirit to inhabit fully. This would mean they were incapable of employing the full range of their thoughts and emotions, leaving the ghost as a relatively simple creature. It was also possible that dying and leaving the body tainted had changed the spirit in some way. Even in conversation when he employed the speak with dead ritual, the ghosts had been different from their human selves. Cruder, vengeful. Being bound in their new form hadn't seemed to perk them up any. If anything, it made them worse. As he touched minds with his new minions, cold, numb fury was all he could sense from them. Currently, 4 of them were spread around the cart in a rough square, with skeletons a further 100 meters in. The other 2 were beside him on either side of the vehicle, with one getting a little too close every time they stopped. He quickly enacted the spell that allowed him to see through the eyes of a minion. The ghosts possessed even poorer vision than the skeletons, but made excellent scouts. Near invisible, they hovered above the ground like a freezing wind. If someone were to get too close, they would more than likely notice the unnatural cold, before they managed to see the faint, purple outline of the spirit. Seen through the eyes of the ghosts, the world was a twisted nightmare landscape covered in strange purple winds. It was unnerving to look at, but far better than being blind, something that proved especially important as he checked the third ghost. "Damn," he said. "Looks like a patrol. Bound to happen eventually. Good thing we don't look suspicious." Tyron stared at him. "What?" "Sure, I'm a talking skull, and the cart is filled with bags of meticulously sorted bones, and we're surrounded by the walking dead. But other than that, we're good." "You're not funny." "Oh, you hurt my feelings. Except I don't have any. I'm a specter clinging to the mortal plane by unnatural means." "Shut up, Dove." Tyron tuned out the skull and focused through the eyes of his servant once more. It was hard to tell, but he felt there might be 3 or 4 of them. Slayers, merchants or marshals, it was impossible to tell. He could move the skeleton nearby closer, or go himself for a better look, but he felt it was best not to take chances. The group wasn't traveling directly for them, but would pass them some distance to the north. "Hup!" He jumped down from the cart, so the skeletons could move it more easily, and instructed them to drag it from the path. The frequent mounds and hills of the foothills were well behind them now, but that didn't mean there weren't places to hide. Vegetation became more common on the plains, the landscape dotted with copses of trees between developed farmland. More and more people coming through the plains, Dove remarked from his position atop a corner post of the cart. "Not really the best time to be planning mass murder, now is it?" "Not like I have a choice," Tyron said. "They aren't far away now. We could probably reach them tonight if we don't run into more travelers." He reached out again and shifted the position of his scouts, making sure he maintained a perimeter. It was inefficient to keep the undead so far from him, but he could spare it. His capacity continued to grow as he progressed, to the point he could easily maintain his current minions, even if the ghosts took far more than a skeleton did. Much of that could be put down to his sloppy work creating the vessels for them. For a first attempt, it wasn't terrible, but much like his early bone stitching, there were many errors. He wasn't confident enough in the technique yet to try and improve his existing specters, but with more practice, he would be able to fix them, somewhat. "That means Yor will catch up to us before we reach them. You think she'll want to help out?" "Yor," Tyron pondered. "I don't think so. She hasn't been too keen to help me thus far. Not overtly, anyway. I got the impression she really didn't like this particular bunch. She wasn't her usual self around the women at that farm." "Are you suggesting?" "I'm saying it's natural for her to have sympathy. She may be an inhuman, blood-sucking monstrosity now, but once upon a time, she was a human woman. If she wants to rip the lungs out of one of those bastards, and then wring them out like a wet cloth into her open mouth, I wouldn't be shocked." "That sounds disturbingly specific. You telling me you haven't fantasized about that?" "That's what I'm saying, Dove. Yes." "Weak." Tyron shook his head, but kept his eyes on the travelers through his ghost. He didn't neglect to check via his other scouts also, making sure he kept tabs on all directions. All right, we can keep moving, he said, instructing the skeletons to return the cart to the trail. He leapt up into the back again. Another few hours and we'll make camp, do a bit of scouting. Any ideas on how you're going to approach Monty and his merry band? You don't have the benefit of being on the defensive this time. It's going to be tricky. Tyron thought for a moment. We'll need to see where they hold up to get a better idea, he said. And I've got a few things to go over with you regarding the spells I have. I think we can work out a couple of things that might help. There's another 7 skeletons to add to the crew as well. Hopefully it's enough. There's not much I can do if it isn't. Well, there's always your Dove. I'm telling you, man, the lung has a surprisingly spongy texture. She could get a lot of juice out of there, running over her arms and face, fucking sexy stuff. You're a twisted, depraved man, Dove. Death doesn't seem to have helped that any. I think it just removed the few inhibitions I had left. Whose idea was it to bring you back to life? I must have been drunk. Hate to break it to you, kid, but with a constitution that high, you may never get drunk again. There's special brews made for tough slayers, but they're expensive as heck. Great. The two continued to bicker as they rode the cart forward into the fading light. Elsewhere on the plains, Laurel slid her fingers along the string of her bow, marveling once more at the fidelity she felt against her skin. As she grew in strength and her skills improved, it was as if the bow had become a part of her body, an extension of her hand in every sense of the word. She'd heard that from several trainers and students who worked exclusively with one weapon, that the more you leveled your class, the more dependent on the weapon you became. When she caressed the string, she would swear it caressed her back. And she was yet to ascend. Just what would her bow become when she was level 60 or 80? She shivered, just imagining it sent a thrill rushing through her. Wary of distracting herself, she bit her cheek, letting the shock of the pain sharpen her mind. It was cold on the plains. A chill wind blew her cloak against her body as a light drizzle fell from overhead. Dreadful weather for an archer. Yet still they were sent out to scout ahead as always. Lucky her abilities could mitigate the effects of damp on the string, or else she'd be totally useless. At least her eyes were alight in the darkness, seeing clearly where others could not. She stepped across the terrain like a ghost, leaving almost no footprint as she went, all senses open wide. The cluster of buildings loomed in the distance, a faint outline against the grey sky. Perhaps a viable camping location. Some proper shelter from the weather would be welcome for the slayers, despite their high levels of endurance. Too soft, was her opinion. I spent longer out hunting in the woods without a single level to my name. But what was this? Light. Flickering through a window. A fire then. Fire meant people. Possibly bad people. Her finger danced down the string once more before she reached behind to pull an arrow from her quiver. She slotted it against the string in one smooth, silent motion as her eyes widened and her nose flared. She would need to get closer. There was nothing to see from here. A defensible set of farmhouses. Rather impressive for a group of families living this far out. Laurel circled around the perimeter and saw that only half the buildings were occupied. The other 2 were dark and cold. She crept closer. She could smell food cooking, and there was laughter from children. She relaxed her grip on the string with some disappointment as she approached to peer through a window. She glimpsed a gathering of women and young folk gathered around the hearth before she tucked her head away. She sighed. As slayers, they hadn't just been tasked with destroying any riftkin they came across. They were also expected to check in on communities they found and ensure they were safe, which meant she had to go and talk to these people. She sighed again and slid the arrow back in her quiver. Might as well get this over with. She stepped back from the window, not wanting to spook anyone, and called out to them. Ho the fire. Slayer patrol. She could hear the startled exclamations from inside, and soon a face appeared, along with a simple bow pointing out into the dark. It was almost cute. Who's there? A woman demanded. Speak your name. I'm Laurel McCraith, she called back, a scout from a Slayer hunting party. We've been asked to check every settlement we find. There was a long moment of silence before further words were spoken. Are you alone? I am. Then come in out of the rain. When she stepped inside, she was surprised to see how fearful these women were, throwing glances at her knives and arrows as they clutched their children to them. She shook out her dark cloak and nodded to them, taking a moment to scan the room. Only a moment later did she realize what was wrong. This wasn't enough people to have worked such a large property. More to the point, where are the men? Could all of them have died defending their families from the kin? Possible, but unlikely. Something far darker had taken place here. Laurel looked from face to face until she found someone prepared to meet her eyes. "Can you tell me what happened here?" she said. The middle-aged woman stared back through hooded eyes. "Not much to tell," she said. "Bandits killed the menfolk and took over. We were rescued a while back and have been staying here since, trying to make some order of the place." The archer nodded gravely. "I'm sorry we took so long to get here," she said quietly. And she was. "Were you rescued by another Slayer group?" she asked. The mood shifted in the room, like a wing curling around a guttering candle. The warmth was sucked away. She waited, but it seemed no one wanted to give an answer. There was something suspicious here. It was for the marshals to deal with, not her. From the sounds of things, they'd have their hands full with this place. Someone else's problem. It was the necromancer boy, someone said. Laurel's eyes widened, turning to this new voice, as the others hissed and growled at the woman. "What?" he said to tell them. "That's what he told us to do." "You've no shame," Besson, another woman spat. "I'm only doing what he said to do," Besson said defensively, a child curled on her lap looking frightened. "This the only way we don't get more trouble. We don't deserve any more trouble." A hush came over the room at those words, but Laurel didn't care. She stepped forward, her eyes alight, a smile on her face like a cat, with one paw planted firmly on a bird's wing. "Why don't you tell me a little more about that?" Chapter 80. Tyron crouched in the bushes, yours words still running circles through his head. "It's important that you clean up your own messes," she told him, that feral gleam in her eye. "The court has sent me to watch over you to some extent, to offer advice and of course, to accept your request to join our association." She grinned then, revealing her fangs and perfectly aligned teeth. "For that to happen, however, you must be worthy. So far, I am impressed with what you have achieved. But you could be so much more than this. If you depend on me, then should I take that as an acknowledgement that you align with my faction?" Her tone implied that he already was leaning that way, considering the favors he already owed the vampires. If he wanted her to help fight his battles, then he may as well formalize the arrangement. He refused. "Don't worry. Should you find yourself on the edge of death, I will find you. The offer I make at that time will be far worse than what you would get right now, but I feel that you may accept it anyway." In that moment, the flawless seductress fell away, and she allowed him to glimpse the beast that dwelled within. She gazed at him like a wolf staring at a hunk of raw meat. I'll keep that in mind," he swallowed, his mouth turned dry. "Do," she said, once again the elegant and sophisticated jaw that he knew. Hidden in the bush, he shivered and pulled his cloak around him once more. It was so easy to forget what she was, sometimes. He was beginning to think she went out of her way to remind him, lest he begin to underestimate her. She'd already appeared to him when he was on the verge of death once. He didn't look forward to a repeat. So he was on his own for this fight. Unless he counted Dove as helpful in any way. He looked down at the skull. "What?" Dove said, a faint glow in his eyes, showing he was alert. "Just wondering if having you around means I have help or not. How about fuck you, big bad necromancer, with your ghosts and your skulls? How many of your lousy minions would stand up to my star wolf?" "Huh, yeah, that's what I thought. No help. If I'm no help, then set me free this instant." "Don't tempt me," Tyron chuckled. "You are going to set me free though, right? We've had a number of conversations about this, but I like to check in every now and again." "Yes, Dove, I'm going to set you free." "Good to know. Now stop procrastinating and go murder these pricks already." Tyron rolled his eyes, but the summoner had a point. He was distracting himself from the task at hand. He still wasn't comfortable with attacking and killing people, even people like this. He hoped he never would be, if he was honest with himself. With a little luck, once he was done with these bandits, he'd be able to make his way to another rift and battle rift kin. Those were enemies he was happy to kill. He could feel them now. After what the abyss creature had done, they stood out in the night like sparks shining against a dark background. Be there trees, bushes, or walls between them, it was impossible for the bandits to hide from him. Not far to go now, just a few kilometers. Being cautious, He wouldn't move until he had a clearer picture of what lay ahead. Thankfully, he no longer had to put himself at risk to gain that type of information. With a mental command, he ordered his ghosts forward. Filled with resentment, they obeyed, drifting over the surface as near invisible spirits. They felt stronger now, more tangible, their emotions boiling closer to the surface than they had before. It was possible they were suppressed in some fashion during the day. Perhaps daylight interfered somehow with the binding. Or was it the other way around? Something about nighttime strengthened it. He shook his head. As much as he'd like to follow that thread, he needed to concentrate. If all went well, he would kill dozens of people before the sun rose. Such a surreal thought. He quickly enacted the magic and peered through his minions' eyes, cycling through the ghosts as they spread out and advanced. Under the moonlight, what he saw through them was even more ethereal and disturbing. The landscape was twisted, covered in purple mist and winds, distorted in strange, unnerving ways. Despite the dizzying feeling and overall unease he felt, it was possible to filter it out and get a reasonable picture of what they were looking at, especially when they got close. He sucked his breath in through his teeth and slowly curled his hand into a fist. "Damn you, Monty, you prick. Did you know I was coming?" He'd expected to find the bandits living as they had before, repeating the same course of action, in the hopes of riding out the storm in a remote location. It would have been horrific, more murder and brutal treatment for the original owners of the land, but as long as he got them all, it would be over. Instead, they'd done something else. Through the twisted vision of the ghosts, he could see a small village, smoke rising from the chimneys of several buildings, and light spilling through doorways and windows as people settled in for the night. What are they playing at? Had they taken the people hostage, or killed them? He didn't see anyone staked on the street at least. He grit his teeth and ordered his minions closer. He had to know what he was dealing with. It was difficult for the ghosts to see details, but as they drifted up to windows or slipped through walls into houses, it appeared as if nothing was awry. Families were resting after dinner, or preparing to sleep, performing the multitude of little tasks that needed doing as they wound down their day. Tyron sent the ghosts to locate the bandits, and he found some, sleeping in haylofts or spare beds, chatting and laughing with their hosts. He grit his teeth as the spirits swept through the dozen or so houses that made up the village, and the same scene was repeated over and over again. Those pricks. They were hiding in plain sight, using the villagers as cover. He could almost imagine the scene, Monty and his crew staggering down the road, exhausted and bloody, begging to be taken in and shown charity. After the break, it would have been simple to paint themselves as the survivors of a farmstead that had been overrun. Most of them were laborers and farmhands. It would be trivial to make use of their skills to ingratiate themselves in this small community, make themselves useful as they waited for the marshals to sweep through. They'd be caught eventually. Once Annette and the other survivors told their story, these men would eventually be tracked down and put to death. For now, though, they bought themselves time, nestled here amongst their living shield. "Fucking assholes," he sighed as he withdrew his vision. "You're way too young for that. Start with the front, get some experience, and then try the road less traveled." "That's good advice." Tyron was too irritated to even respond to that. "They've swarmed into a village and are acting like refugees," he spat, staring through the dark at the lights that burned in his mind's eye. "After everything they've done, these shitstones. Woo, that's some brass-balled fuckery right there. If they weren't bandit scum, I'd almost be impressed. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? They've got dozens of innocent people down there amongst them. This isn't how I thought it was going to go." The former summoner didn't seem to think much of it. "So, you think the villagers are going to jump up to defend these strangers? The moment you roll into town with your bone patrol, most of them are going to roll under the nearest bed and shit themselves. Hopefully not in that order, for their sake. Your skeletons might be weak as piss, but someone who awakened as a farmer isn't exactly shit hot in a fight. Can they plant seeds like a motherfucker? Absolutely. Can they kill anything that doesn't eat crops? Not so much. But what if they do? I'm not going to kill innocent people, Dove. That's a line that I refuse to cross. That won't happen. Like I said, they're just going to run away. We can't know that for sure. And what happens if the bandits use them as hostages? Threaten to kill them unless I walk away. What happens then?" There was silence for a moment as the skull contemplated what the young mage was saying. Purple light flickered and danced in Dove's hollow eyes. Look, kid, he said finally, there's a lot that could happen here. There's a world where you and I walk away from here, right now. Well, you walk, never mind that. We leave and then these bandits never hurt another soul. Then they get arrested, put to death, and it's all over. No fuss, no muss. That's possible. How likely do you think that is? Not very, Tyron said. Of course, it's not fucking likely. At the very least, they'll fight the marshals when they come to make arrests. There's another possibility, though. You go down there tonight, murder all of them, and no villagers are harmed in the process. None of them escape, and you collect Monty's soul and stuff it into a hollow bone for lonely men to stick their dicks in. How likely is that? Tyron slumped. Again, not very, he said. So we end up with a middle ground. If you go down there, things are going to get fucked up. The villagers will see you, run from you, maybe try and attack you. Monty may even try to rally them to his defense, screaming about the evil mage who's come to kill them all. So fucking what? Do you remember why we're here? The necromancer swallowed and nodded reluctantly. I need levels, he said. It sounded so selfish when he said it out loud. Was it really alright for him to be doing this for such a reason? Exactly. There's no point backing out now when you've already come this far. There's 30 odd sacks of progression down there, so sharpen up a stick and go poke 'em full of holes. Spook the villagers off as best you can. Grab what we can and run for it. The empty sockets of the skull glowed brighter. Listen, kid, every high-ranked slayer is a selfish piece of shit. When you get down to it, if you'll forgive me, your parents are Exhibit A right down to fucking Z. Tyron nodded. There was no denying that. I get that you don't want to act solely in your own interests. That's great. But if you aren't prepared to take this step, then what are you going to do? Give up? What were his options? Rifts existed to the east and south, but it would be more than difficult to get out there, impossible even. He needed to be stronger to improve his abilities and acquire better ones. As he was right now, he'd be annihilated by the first slayer he came across. If he walked away from this village out of fear of killing the locals, and then came back a week later to find the men on stakes and the women in cages, what would he say to himself then? No choices. There's never any choices. I'll do it, he said, but I refuse to kill any innocents. If they fight, I'll just have to take it as best I can. I think that's the best decision, Dove agreed. You'll want to have an exit plan in place, though. The moment we leave, they'll be screaming to the law at the top of their lungs. You'll be even more wanted than you are right now with 30 murders to your name. Thanks, Dove, Tyron said, sarcasm dripping from each word. I appreciate the warning. It sounded bad, but in reality, he was already being hunted, so not much would change. He would need to clear out of the area and hunker down somewhere for a while, since they'd swarm over this village once the word got out. Alright then. Did you want to come along or should I leave you behind? Fuck that, Dove said. I wanna see that fat fucker Monty beg. If I had my spells, I'd feed him to my star wolf, and when he came out the other end, I'd banish the shit to the abyss. No way I'm missing his death. Tyron paused. Do astral beings shit? He asked, curious. What? No, of course not. That shouldn't get in the way of a good diatribe, though. Stop worrying about the fucking details. I just wanted to know. You're too inquisitive, that's your damn problem. Always have to know everything. That's probably why I achieved 2 magic-related mysteries before I ranked up. Nobody likes a show-off, you big-headed bastard. You fucking... What's that? Didn't hear you at the end there. Fuck you, Tyron. By the tits, you piss me off sometimes. Love you too. Let's go. With a silent command, he directed his skeletons forwards. The sleepy village sat quiet in the dark as the necromancer and his skeletal minions surrounded them. Blades bare. Chapter 81. There was no need to fight fair, not against opponents like these. Tyron stepped through the darkness with care, directing his minions forward, surrounding the prey. It was almost unfair. In his eyes, the bandits were torches in the dark. He knew where each and every one of them was. This close, he could tell when they stretched or reached behind to scratch their backsides. The first fell quietly and quickly. Weary and wanting to sleep, a figure stepped out behind a house to take a piss against a tree. Silent as death, 3 of the skeletons stalked him in the night, walking up behind and ramming their blades through his back. He didn't get a chance to scream. 1 down. How nice would it be if they all obliged him in this way? But there was no chance of that. Inside the buildings, They sat or lay, unsuspecting, and he would have to go in and get them. The ghosts drifted through the village as Tyron gathered them to him, the air growing noticeably cooler as they approached. There was still some low-hanging fruit he could pick before the villagers would be alerted to his presence. Best to make life as easy as possible. Skeletons moved through the village in groups of 5 or 6, their blades wreathed in death magic. He had them surround several buildings, but he brought another group with him behind the village's small tavern. There was a small stable there, and in the stalls, another 2 bandits were curled on the hay. After a moment of hesitation, Tyron tilted his head to one side and sent his 6 ghosts forward. As far as he knew, they were useless in battle, not really able to touch or grasp anything mundane. But a thought stuck in his head. Whenever he brushed against them, they elicited a painful cold. What would happen if they were to move inside another person? Eyes on the 2 stalls, he ordered his minions forward. The spirits drifted, malevolence rolling off them in waves as they approached the closed wooden gates, and phased directly through. The figures stirred as they felt the unnatural chill. But he didn't give them time to react, directing the spirits to move directly within the 2 men, 3 ghosts each. The moment the bandits felt the ice freeze their blood, they sat up with startled exclamations that died in their throats. Like vultures, the undead descended on them, pressing themselves into bandit flesh and each other. Tyron felt his magic reserves drop precipitously. Apparently, it was not as easy for the spirits to move inside a living creature as it was for them to pass through a wooden wall. The results were worth the expense in the end. A faint gurgling and scratching could be heard from where he stood as the 2 men thrashed and tried to cry out, but were unable to make a sound. The ghosts took cruel pleasure in bringing suffering to the living. He could feel it through the link, the satisfaction they felt in freezing those men to death. It took them several minutes to finally pass away. He suspected, but couldn't know for sure, that it could have been over quicker than that. But the spirits had taken it upon themselves to extend the suffering of their victims. Sick bastards. He wondered if all spirits would be this twisted, or if the bandits he had killed and recruited were particularly vengeful against their still living comrades. Another 2 down. It was good to know his new minions weren't totally useless in a fight, even if the cost was far too high. Though he wouldn't wish such a death on anyone, he'd prefer to put down as many targets in silence as he could, but it wouldn't be economical. This would eventually boil down to a fight, and he would need magic to support his troops. Still, he kept the spirits close. He could use them in a pinch. Sensing no more easy prey, there was little for Tyron to do but approach one of the houses and knock on the door. "Who the fuck is that?" A voice called jovially from inside. "Probably thinks I'm a neighbor." "Just calling in," Tyron said. The door was pulled open to reveal a bleary-eyed farmer staring out into the night. Dim light from the fire spilled through the entrance, but Tyron hardly needed it to find what he was after. There were 3 of them inside. Before the villager could react, Tyron dove forward, shouldering the door open and pushing the man back. With a short mental command, the 6 skeletons rushed into the small house, eyes aglow. The moment he saw the undead storming into the house, the farmer stumbled back until his shoulders hit the wall, his face pale with fear. "I'm not here for you," Tyron said to him, but he wasn't sure he was heard. The bandits had barely rolled out of their blankets before the skeletons were on them, stabbing viciously. The men cried out, one of them shouting "You," when he saw Tyron in the room. But there was no escape for them. Taken by surprise and unarmed, they went down quickly. Once his targets were dead, he directed his minions to leave, holding the door open while they moved past, holding the gaze of the terrified farmer as they did. "I'm only here for them," he said. "Don't get in my way." With that, he shut the door and moved to the next building. He got through 2 more houses before someone bothered to relay the alarm. Another 5 bandits dead. Then people began to pour from the houses. Half-dressed and clutching farming implements or crude weapons in their hands, the villagers stumbled out into the dark alongside the bandits. Calling and cursing, they tried to make sense of the situation, but it was the guests amongst them who were first to realize what was happening. "It's him. Kill that fucker. Find the bastard." Chaos erupted between the houses as villagers screamed in terror at the sight of the walking dead amongst them, while the bandits tried to group together to fight them. Amidst it all, Tyron hunted them, coordinating his minions to gang up on every target they could reach as they stepped outside. Several figures broke and ran into the darkness, desperate to flee the danger. Tyron's head swiveled rapidly as he tried to track the bandits in the dark, his hands raised ready to cast, bone armor wrapped around his forearms. Before the situation could devolve further, someone stepped up to take control before Tyron killed too many. "Necromancer," Monty bellowed. "Foul magic. He'll kill all of ye if ye let him. To arms! To arms!" Despite predicting this would happen, Tyron still found it difficult to comprehend the gall of the man. He wasn't skilled enough with words to even attempt to talk the crowd down, which was why he'd never tried to make the attempt. All he needed to do was keep the villagers out of his way as long as he could. Another bandit went down. Several blades buried his back as people screamed in fear. "Monty, you piece of shit," Tyron bellowed. "Did you really think you could hide where I wouldn't find you? Your bones belong to me, yours and every idiot you dragged down with you. To arms!" Monty bellowed. "Fight for your life." Small fights broke out as the bandits began to organize themselves, battling back against the undead. Some tried to find torches to light, but it took time in which the skeletons had a powerful advantage. The eyes of the dead didn't care for light or dark, they saw as well in the night as they did in the day. A chaotic situation, one that he had prepared for, but was overwhelming nevertheless. In his mind, he directed his minions as best as he could, grouping them against their foes, so they always held the numbers advantage. Several villagers had responded to Monty's call, rushing to fight against him with whatever they had to hand. It was recklessly brave and complicated the battle massively, as he had to take care not to hurt them. "Come on, Monty," Tyron called, mocking. "I can see you, hiding in the back. Why don't you step forward for once? I'm sure your men are sick of dying for you by now." The chubby bandit leader continued to rush around on the backline, urging others to put themselves in harm's way rather than step forward himself. An expected show of cowardice, and a frustrating one. If he could silence that voice, this would be over so much faster. As more torches began to be lit, Tyron made sure to slip into the shadows. The longer it took them to find him, the better off he would be. Directing the battle from the backlines was the correct move for a necromancer, though he could appreciate the irony of baiting Monty for doing the same. "Protect your children, protect your wives," Monty roared as he rallied more into the fight. "There'll be none left alive if he wins." By now, any villagers who hadn't run screaming into the night were scrambling to arm themselves. He needed to push hard. At his direction, the 6 ghosts drifted forward, homing in on 6 bandits engaged in a shoving match with his front line of skeletons. Despite his best efforts, the skeletons were not nearly as strong as he'd like, and even the farmers were able to match them in this respect. By locking up the undead's blades with their own shovels, picks and implements, they could lean on them and allow their fellows to hack at the vulnerable bones. Only by outnumbering the opponent could the skeletons protect themselves from this tactic. But with more villagers joining the fight, the numbers were turning against him. Near invisible and dripping with malice, the spirits drifted between the skeletons and plunged into their targets, causing the men to scream and gurgle, as the cold penetrated their flesh and went straight into their bones. An opening that Tyron capitalized on immediately. Skulls grinning, the skeletons took their freed blades and rammed them straight through the chest of their opponents. Straight through the ghosts at the same time. Another 6 down. The skeletons pressed forward and Tyron felt the bandits and their allies start to waver. It was time to make his move. He ran his hands over the modified bone armor that covered him, as if to reassure himself, before he strode forward, flanked by 2 skeletons he had held in reserve. He spun magic almost absent-mindedly, creating a bolt that he held ready in his right hand, his eyes locked on one figure that blazed in his mind. "Not getting away this time, you fucker." As he stepped into the light, he could see fear ignite in the villager's eyes. He could imagine how he looked, unkempt, covered in bones that bound themselves to his body like barbaric armor. The bandits weren't much better. He had killed so many of them already, and now here he was, ready to do it again. "I'm here for the outsiders. Villagers can leave and be spared." He yelled again, hoping some would listen and make a break for it. In the thick of the fighting, it was unlikely any could hear him, but it was worth a shot. His face settled in grim lines as he once again ordered the spirits forward. He'd wanted to preserve his magic, but he couldn't allow this to go on. The ghosts responded, dripping with malice as they wrought devastation on their former allies. Seeing an opening, Tyron launched the bolt from his open palm, catching a bandit in the thigh. The man collapsed, crying out in pain as he clutched at the wound. A skeleton put him out of his misery. That figure blazing in his mind was hesitating now. He could see it, but he wouldn't allow him to go. He ripped his sword free from its scabbard and charged, slashing at the bandits in his way. "You monster!" A village man, no older than 20, rushed him from the side, a woodcutter axe raised high in both hands. With a swift command, a skeleton stepped in front of the man, taking his charge and knocking him back. "Run!" Tyron barked at him. Fear and rage twisted the face of the young man into something inhuman, as he battled against two instincts: fight or flee. The necromancer took that choice away. A skeletal foot planted itself on the village's chest, a blade was placed at his throat. It would tie up a minion, but he could afford to pay that price. Monty had seen enough. As others still fought the clearly losing battle in the night, he turned and broke into a run. Not likely. Casting one-handed, Tyron summoned a bolt to his left and dashed after him. Without the benefit of whatever the abyss had done to him, the bandit leader would likely have succeeded in escaping. After taking 10 steps from the nearest torch, the scenery vanished into darkness. But that wasn't enough to hide from Tyron, not for someone marked for death. He sprinted after him, his eyes locked on that form he could feel running ahead. A palm thrust forward, a pulse of magic shot out into the night. "Fuck!" the bandit cried. Then Tyron was on him, sword right into the cursing man's back. "Hey there, Monty," he grinned. "Nice of you to stick around." "Yeah, fucking crazy," the man said. "You're a twisted bastard. Bit rich coming from you, a murderous, raping piece of shit." He reached forward and grabbed a fistful of hair. "Get up. You'll be coming with me for a moment." "Kill me, ye gutless worm." "Oh no, don't you worry. Someone else is going to decide your fate, not me." With his sword pressed into Monty's back and maintaining his grip on the bandit's hair, he marched the stumbling, cursing and threatening bandit back to the village. The fighting was over. Several bandits and all of the villagers had fled, running out into the cold and dark. He hoped they would be alright out there. Likely they would stay away until morning before returning to see if he was gone, or try to make it to a neighboring settlement. Either way, Tyron wanted to be gone before they returned. Although there was still that one man, pressed to the ground by an undead fort, Tyron would have to deal with him later. He issued mental commands and saw his minions get to work gathering bodies, laying them out, preparing the ground for the business to come. More than 20 corpses to be processed, far too many to let them go to waste. By the 5, "Yeah, a monster." Monty sounded terrified as he saw the undead moving in the flickering light. Tyron chuckled. "Monty, you have no idea what a monster is, but you're going to find out. I was surprised to hear you call me your said. Things seemed to go well enough without my help." "They did. I wanted to give you a gift of sorts," Tyron replied. The vampire eyed the quivering bandit, her eyes flashing red as she looked him up and down. "You wish to make an offering of this creature." There was something formal about the way she said it that caused Tyron to hesitate, then choose his words carefully. "I felt that you had a particular dislike for these men, in particular for the one who led them. I thought you might like to," he searched for the right word, "determine his fate." "What the fuck?" Monty whispered as he stared ahead at the woman before him. A smile flickered across your face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "You know that this would have no bearing on any debt you owe the court. This is a separate exchange between the two of us." Tyron nodded. "Not even an exchange, a gift freely given." "Then release him and step back." The necromancer did as she asked, releasing Monty and taking several quick, long strides backward. The bandit stumbled forward, unbalanced by the sudden lack of pressure. But before he could take another step, Yor was there. She flashed before him, arms snaking forward and snatching him up, twisting the bandit, so she held him from behind, her chin resting against the pale flesh of his neck. She smiled. "There are 2 ways I can do this," Yor breathed, as she ran a tender hand down the side of her captive's neck. "I can give you pleasure beyond your mortal imagination, an indescribable sensation running through every inch of your body." She smiled and tightened her grip on the bandit leader. "One taste and you will be addicted. You'll beg me to drain you each and every night, throwing yourself at my feet like a dog. Eventually, that is what you will become, an animal, crawling on all fours, desperate for any glance I would spare you." The vampire's voice had lowered, becoming husky as her breath quickened. Her lips parted, and she ran her tongue down the side of Monty's neck, tracing the artery that pounded with his lifeblood. Or I can make it agony, Yor whispered into his ear. Pain like you cannot conceive as I tear the soul from your body. I'll drink every drop of blood you have in you, then drink your spirit. You'll feel it as you settle into my stomach and I consume everything that you are, have been and will be. She slid her grip on the bandit until she held him by the shoulder with her left hand and a fistful of hair in the right. Her hands tightened, nails digging into flesh, causing red blood to flow. Monty whimpered. The eyes of the vampire blazed with beastly glee, her face twisted into a feral visage, all trace of humanity gone. Which fate do you desire? She sighed. Choose quickly, I have little patience left. If he took longer than a few seconds, Tyron suspected she would simply tear into him. The need for blood radiated from her in a scarlet aura he could see with his bare eyes. Thar first one, Monty begged, please. Avenue mercy on me. Thar first one. You'll listen to his pleas with hooded eyes. She pulled him towards her. No, she said. Her mouth opened wide, giving Tyron a clear view of the 4 elongated fangs, before she bit down, sinking her teeth deep into the bandit. Monty screamed. He wailed as if every part of his body were afire. It was terrible to hear, the despair and fear and agony so total as to be all-encompassing. Tyron wished he could close his ears, but he couldn't. He couldn't even look away. Yor's eyes locked on his, and he watched them blaze with obscene elation as she fed. It lasted far too long, the scream ongoing until the last moment. The corpse of Monty, the would-be bandit king, fell to the ground, drained of blood, and even more than that, his skin was already turning grey, as if all that had been vital within him was gone. Yor stood over the body, breathing heavily, blood running down her chin, trickling off her fingertips. She brought a hand to her face and licked the blood from each digit and sighed. Then the monster was gone. She flicked her fingers, and the blood flew from her body to spatter on the ground. Once more she stood tall, calm and flawless, a sly smile on her lips. Your gift is most welcome, she said. Now you must quickly prepare. We cannot linger long. Chapter 82. Come on. I'm trying to work. There's no fucking way you don't agree. I'd really like to not be part of this conversation. You don't have a choice. I refuse to speak of anything else until this is done. You can either answer my question, or punt my soul into the great beyond. And I think we both know you still aren't ready to do the second. So, watching Yor suck the soul out of that fat fuck has got to be the hottest damn thing I've seen in my life and afterlife. Tell me you agree. Tyron rolled his head back and looked at the sky, as if hoping a way to escape this discussion might strike him like a bolt from above. He might even accept a lightning strike at this point, despite being bloody up to his elbows from carving through human remains. Thinking back to the disturbing side of Yor feeding was enough to make him queasy. Look, if you're going to force me to state an opinion, then I will. Rather than arousing, I would describe the experience as disturbing and horrific. Dove, she ate his soul. So fucking sexy, the skull breathed. I knew you were a little disturbed when you were alive, but I didn't realize you were this twisted, Tyron observed. Then grunted as he pulled a femur free from the meat of the leg with a wet pop. He placed the bone to one side before picking up his cleaver. Shins were next. Do you think being trapped in a skull is warping you in some way? Or were you always this bad? Honestly, I think being dead has slanted my views a little bit. It's not like I have balls, or emotions, or a dick, or feelings anymore, so even I wouldn't describe it as a physical arousal. It's something deeper than that, more meaningful. I don't get it, the souls I recruited. The skull laughed. To become ghosts are basically pissed off 100% of the time. The only thing they like is murder, and even then, they only enjoy it in a pissed off sort of way. How come you're basically the same as you were when you were alive, with the possible exception of being even more of a pervert? I'm just a far superior soul, Dove said, sounding smug. Comparing me with some chumps who pushed a wheelbarrow for a living. You're being ridiculous. Tyron paused for a moment as he looked at his friend and mentor. Is that really a thing? You have a stronger soul based on your class and levels? I have no idea. Sounds like something a necromancer should figure out. Souls and bones and shit. That's your trade, not mine. The young mage grunted and brought down his cleaver heavily. Was there a difference between souls? Some qualitative distinction that allowed some to keep their personalities more or less intact even beyond the grave? Is resurrection possible? A shiver ran down his spine. The thought was tantalizing, and he couldn't ignore it once it had wormed its way into his head. If a soul was sufficiently powerful, say a top-grade slayer, would they be strong enough that they retain their thoughts and memory perfectly after death? A similar process must be used to create a lich, he realized. A powerful mage capturing their own soul and then animating their remains with it. There's no way it's that simple. If it were, it would be way more common. If I can realize this after a few months, then surely every mage in the Empire has been able to realize the same thing. Where's the catch? I really don't understand why you find this so twisted, though Dove was saying. Yours is smoking hot, that's obvious. And the idea of ripping the soul out of a piece of shit like Monty, causing him unspeakable suffering in the process, is a pure justice boner on top of an already delectable cake. What's not to love? I think half the reason you want to have this conversation is because it's nighttime, and you know that she's probably listening in. You just want to make her uncomfortable. I don't understand why you're so keen to sexualize a vampire, who by her own admission is incapable of physically engaging in the act. Which act? Shut up. Time for the feat. Extracting all the bones from the dense sinews in there was a complete pain. If he could find a way to dissolve flesh without having to spend a feat or spell choice on it, he'd be a happy necromancer. Even if he only used it for feet and hands, the process of extracting bones would be twice as quick. How can you say I'm the one sexualizing her? She literally flesh-formed her own body to be an irresistible honeypot. I'm merely describing the reality that she created. A sexy fucking reality. I think the reason it's weird, Tyron said as he got to work after checking the edges on his thinner knives, is because the trap is only supposed to work on people who don't know it's a trap. In your case, it seems to have heightened your interest, not lessened it. That's weird. By extension, you are weird. I'm trying hard not to judge you. In some ways I find the obsession fascinating. I'm pretty sure the only reason she hasn't ripped out your soul and eaten it is because she thinks that might be what you want. I dream about it every day, Dove sighed. That's what I'm talking about. That right there. For the next while, Dove remained blessedly quiet as Tyron continued to work. When he finally finished with the feat, he took a step back from the impromptu butchering table he'd set up in the center of the village, and had his skeletons collect the flesh to take to the midden. Another pair of skeletons then took the bones, and he absently directed them to lay them out in the correct pattern, adding another full set to the others he had already completed drying around the fire pit. So much work to do and only one night to get it done. His fingers ached already, and he was barely halfway through the bandit corpses. The bones wouldn't even be the end of it. He still had the spirits to deal with. He wouldn't turn them all into ghosts, but that didn't mean he would let them go to waste either. He had a few ideas he wanted to test. It was a shame he didn't have Monty's soul, but he'd received a worse fate than anything Tyron could concoct. He was still being digested in the guts of a vampire, and from what he gathered, it wasn't an overly pleasant experience. He wanted to ask Yor more about it, but seeing the animalistic gleam to her eyes, he decided now would be a dangerous time to talk. Bring over the next 3, he ordered out loud and mentally at the same time. Don't talk to the minions. You asked me to remind you. Right. So easy to forget. Don't talk to the minions, idiot. In some ways, it felt more natural to speak to them out loud, even if it served no purpose. Taking any strides toward humanizing his undead was a mistake. If I didn't have Dove around, I might have already gone mad. It's not healthy being surrounded by undead slaves all the time. I need people to talk to as well. Which reminded him of his prisoner. He stepped to one side and washed his hands in the bucket he'd fished up from the well, before walking a few doors down to a small building being watched by 4 skeletons and knocking. Calum, you in there? He waited for a moment, but no reply came. If you don't answer me, I'm going to go in there. Don't come in. So you are there? I don't want to talk to you, monster. This again. These men were criminals. They did terrible, terrible things. Says you. We spent a week with them. They worked like dogs to help support everyone in the village. I bet they did, but think for a second. If I'm really a terrible necromancer who murders everyone and turns them into undead, why are you alive? Why did I go to such lengths to keep you villagers alive? Doesn't make much sense unless I'm telling the truth. It's hard to take your words as truth when you're outside cutting bodies apart. Everyone gets hung up on the butchery even more than the death magic. Tyron sighed. He wasn't going to convince anyone he was a hero after running into their village and cutting down refugees. No point dwelling on it. He had work to do and he needed to get going. Open up the door. I've got another 3 for you to check. The skeletons had lain the bodies on the ground, and the mage conjured a light for the young villager to see. He was confident that no unmarked person had been killed in the attack, but it didn't hurt to have someone check the corpses. Stand back, Calum said, voice shaking. Tyron took a few steps back, and the door opened a crack, just wide enough for the prisoner to see out. He eyeballed the bodies on the ground before a finger extended through the gap. That one, that's Gully. He lived with us for 6 months. The necromancer stared down at the corpse in shock. You're sure? Of course, I'm sure. Gully came at harvest time and stuck around working on the Perkins farm. So much for only killing the bandits, murderer. That doesn't make sense, he muttered. Everyone who died had been marked. He'd been so careful. His skeletons had not driven their weapons into anyone without him checking first. He hadn't made any mistakes. He was sure of it. He leaned forward to look at the body more carefully. It was intact, no puncture wounds or cuts. What had killed him? Realization struck him. This one had died to the ghosts. One of the 2 in the stalls, among the first to be killed. There was no chance he'd made a mistake. That hadn't taken place in the chaos of the fighting, but in the dead quiet. He could remember the 2 figures blazing in his awareness through the wooden doors. Either the beast in the abyss had made a mistake, or this prick signed up with the bandits, he sighed. You expect me to believe that? Calum retorted from behind the door. Tyron shook his head. No, I don't. Didn't matter that it was the truth. If he tried to explain how he knew, he'd damn himself even further. He continued to look down at the body on the cold ground. Had this man even done anything wrong? Or was the intent enough? How was he to know what measures the Abyss used to judge such matters? Ultimately, it was his responsibility, as he had trusted their decisions implicitly. A mistake it was too late to back down from. I'll bury this man, he said. Thank you, Calum. The villager slammed and locked the door once again, but not before shooting one final glare through the gap. A few skeletons approached and withdrew the villager corpses. Tyron frowned, frozen in thought. Ultimately, there was nothing he could do to change the situation, no matter how much he hated it. He returned to his workbench, had his minions drop a new body on it, and got to work. He lost himself in the butchery, his movements efficient and precise as he cut away the flesh, severed tendons, and procured what he needed for his craft. The useless flesh was taken outside of town and dumped in a midden pit. He had a pair of skeletons dig, while the bones were carefully sorted, washed and dried on the ground before being stored. He was at it for hours, his hands, arms and shoulders aching until he was interrupted. One of the ghosts was the first tip-off he received as it moved, drifting away from its post without being asked. The necromancer stood to wipe his hands, mentally checking on the spirit before flicking his vision to it. Positioned to watch the area between the village and the woods most had escaped to during the night in case anyone returned. The ghost had wandered away from its spot. With a thought, he ordered it back into place, demanding the ghost turn around so he could see around it. Nothing, at least nothing obvious. What was going on? Moments before he would dismiss the disturbance and go back to work, he lost contact with a skeleton. He whipped around in time to see the bones crumbling to the ground, the light fading from the skull as it dropped. A man was there, blade in hand, running towards him. Running fast. Running really fast. Oh! Fuck. Tyron swore as he turned to snatch the only weapon he had to hand off the table. His cleaver. What? Dove spluttered, coming awake in a rush. Fucking balls. Run, kid. But there was nowhere to run. Skeletons came running, snatching up their weapons, but they couldn't make it in time. Steel flashed under the light of his globes, cutting straight for his neck. Sweat broke out of every pore in Tyron's body as he ducked low and felt the wind of the blade pass over him. First cut. He lifted his head and brought his cleaver up at the same time. Through some miracle, he managed to catch the next clash straight on the edge of his knife. Sparks flew as the sword bit deep into the cleaver, and Tyron's wrist bent back to the point of breaking as he absorbed the shocking force of the blow. I needed that knife, he ground out. His free hand flashed through several symbols as he formed a bolt, releasing it at point-blank range the moment it was ready. The body that had been overpowering him 1 second spun gracefully away the next, almost yanking the ruined cleaver from his hands in the process. He managed to hold onto it, but only barely. Unbalanced, he tried to reset his feet, but was too slow. A vicious stab shot out of the shadows, a sword tip headed straight for his heart. Fucking dash. Tyron threw himself into a spin, barely avoiding harm as he pulled back his left shoulder as the blade scraped past the bone armor on his chest. Where now? He was off balance and vulnerable. Where would the next strike come? Head or gut? Head or gut? Head. Without seeing where the strike was coming from, he snapped his arms up on either side of his face, palms inward. Crunch! The sword smashed into the bones lashed with magic to his forearms, splitting them apart and biting into his flesh. Blood sprayed and Tyron grit his teeth to ward off the pain. Purple eyes swarmed in the dark, blades flashing, and the figure was gone, sliding backwards and away from the minions before stopping 10 meters away. Oh, shit. Not good. Not good. Dove chattered. Shut up, Dove. Tyron ground out, not taking his eyes from his opponent. The fight to this point had taken mere seconds, and already, he'd nearly had his heart cored like an apple, and been forced into a 50-50 with his life on the line. Slayer. This was a slayer. One of the villagers must have stumbled into a scout doing the rounds, and they'd come running to kill the evil necromancer. At least, he hoped it was a scout. If there was more than one, he was dead already. The swordsman, or some variant, watched carefully as the skeletons gathered themselves, but didn't wait long before making his move. He adjusted his grip on the blade, leaned to the side, then flickered and vanished. Or at least it looked that way. 2 skeletons died before Tyron realized where the Slayer had gone, cursing as he turned. Magic, you idiot, you have to use magic. He was a poor fighter at best. He had to use the strengths of his class to fight back. He raised his hands and began to chant, flashing through the sigils at record pace, as he desperately sought to level the playing field. From nowhere, knives flashed from the shadows, aimed straight for his head. 2 shield skeletons stepped forward to catch them, leaving Tyron free to complete his cast. Death blades. The moment he finished, he moved straight to the next. I have to slow him down. I can barely keep up with my eyes. My skeletons could swing for a year, and might never hit him. With a defensive group of undead and more arriving, he had to get his support spells out now. If he lost more skeletons before they came into effect, there may be no point in having cast them at all. Quicker than ever, the words rolled from his tongue, each enunciated perfectly, the timing and rhythm flawless. Unwilling to allow him to work his magic, the swordsman went on the attack. Directing his minions at the same time as working complicated spells was taxing for Tyron, and he almost fumbled his words as he tried to react. Steel flashed in a glittering arc, and another 2 minions were lost. The swordsman rushed through, and the skeletons swung at shadows and dust too slow to respond. Another charge, another glittering slash, another minion crumbling to the ground. This isn't good. He finished the spell with a roar, his hands snapping down, as his magic poured into the ground beneath his feet. Shivering curse. Perhaps it was counterintuitive to cast it on himself, but the undead weren't affected, and now it was impossible for the swordsman to attack without being within the radius. Hands free, Tyron quickly snapped together a pair of magic bolts, and held them at the ready. The swordsman sized him up for a moment, and Tyron did the same. He was young, perhaps not even level 20 yet. If he was, then he wasn't far past it. Thank anyone who'll listen for that. If he was level 30, I'd be less one head. No chance of a conversation, he said quietly. The swordsman shifted, then shook his head slightly. As expected. Come on then. Weapon-based classes, especially light weapons such as the sword, were highly mobile killing machines. The fight between them was never going to last long. I can't keep him off me, not for long. All I need to win is to hold him still for 1 second. 1 second and I win. Tyron grit his teeth. This was going to suck. He spread his minions slightly and had them lower their weapons, ready to stab. That should make it a little harder for the Slayer to run in, or risk being impaled on the magic-infused blades. Apparently, it didn't matter. The swordsman flashed left and right, carving through 2 more skeletons in an instant, before dashing through the formation and out the other side. 2 magic bolts flew through the air before thudding into the ground. As the Slayer twisted out of the way, a skeleton stepped forward and thrust only to receive a sword through the skull for its trouble. 2 more bolts formed and he fired them right away. The swordsman was constantly on the move, and the formation adjusted moment to moment as more skeletons were picked off. Damn. A wide swing with an axe, and suddenly there was an imbalance in the line, right in front of the necromancer. Like a hawk swooping on exposed prey, the slayer darted in. Tyron felt the shadow of death reach out toward him as that sword closed in, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. He brought his arms up to cover his heart. Pain exploded in his gut, and the sword stabbed clean through, sliding between the gaps between the bone armor and out his back. Quick as a snake, Tyron's hands flashed down to grip the slayer's forearms. Sorry about this," he gurgled, blood already dripping from his lips. The slayer tried to yank the sword free, but he held on. Then the ghosts were there. Bone-piercing cold surrounded them as three spirits drifted into the swordsman. The man stiffened, then wrestled as he realized something was wrong, but Tryon held on. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Muscles frozen, the slayer couldn't react as the skeletons closed in. The three closest plunged their weapons into his flesh, the death magic coating sizzling against his skin. They stabbed over and over again, as the ghosts locked up his body with their penetrating cold. Soon, the light faded from his eyes, and he slumped to the ground. Tyron stood over the corpse, blade punctured straight through him and bleeding all over the ground. "Ah!" He spat a mouthful of blood on the ground next to him. "This is going to be real bad." Chapter 83. Sword still embedded in him, Tyron staggered toward the largest building in town. He needed paper, badly. Kid, you still alive over there? Please, by the melons of the mother, don't be dead. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a glass case being studied by mages." "Tyron, you alive?" "Shut up," Dove the necromancer squeezed out as he walked past. "Oh, thank fuck. How the hell did you manage to win?" "Swordsman is a shitty matchup for you, maybe the shittiest. Wanna turn me around so I can take a look at you?" "Wait," he said. In the back of his mind he pondered just what he was going to do to get out of this mess. Could he treat his wound? Was there anything he could use in this village to help clean and bind it? Another part of him was wondering what the consequences of killing a slayer would be. There must be a cleanup crew not far from here. Surely they would hunt him once they learned what had happened. How much time did he have? Did this mean he would continue to be pursued even after the stray Rivkin were eliminated? Another part of him dwelled on the sinking feeling that his dream of one day being accepted was now more remote than ever, if not dead entirely. I killed a slayer. Damn it all. He hadn't had a choice. That was starting to be a recurring theme. He never had a choice. Would he ever be in a position to choose for himself again? The last time he'd made a meaningful decision about his own fate was when he chose to run rather than give up his class, his chance to rise. He shoved the door open with his shoulder, careful not to catch the sword still lodged in him on the frame as he entered. Light. He rummaged around with blood-slick hands until he found what he was looking for, a town ledger used to track births and deaths in the village, as well as other comings and goings. Hands shaking, he ripped out a page and made his way to a table. Breathe. Just breathe. Adrenaline was only now starting to leach out of his system. The pain was incredible, worse than anything he'd ever felt. Should he remove the sword? Or would that hasten the bleeding and make things worse? Medical knowledge had never been a specialty of Tyron's. He was paying for that now. One thing he did know, only his higher than normal constitution was keeping him standing. Thanks to his necromancer class, he was far more durable than a person had any right to be. It was the only thing that gave him any chance of surviving this mess, which was why he needed to perform the ritual. Should he gain a few levels, it would toughen him up further. He could only hope it would be enough. One hand on the paper, he enacted the ritual and watched the letters form. No need to cut himself this time. Blood still ran in bright red rivulets down his forearms where he'd been wounded. Eyes swimming, he skipped over the bulk of the messages. He had no interest in learning if his cooking had increased again. After a time, he found what he was looking for. You have raised the dead, honed your craft and done battle with your minions. Undead Weaver has reached level 25. You have received +3 strength, +6 constitution, +9 intelligence, +3 wisdom, +3 willpower, +3 manipulation and +6 poise. That was excellent, a new spell or skill along with a feat. It had been worth making this trip to gain these levels. Unfortunately, directly beneath was something else he didn't want to see. Your patrons delight in the chaos you sow. Like ripples expanding from a stone dropped in a pool, Your actions distort the future in so many ways. The Dark Ones remain most entertained. You are safe from their hands for now. The Scarlet Court watches with interest as your mind continues to grow. Their desire for allegiance grows apace. The Abyss hungers, only secrets and souls will sate them, and not for long. Anathema has reached level 14. You have received +6 Constitution, +6 Intelligence, +6 Willpower. The stat gain was welcome, as was the chance to choose new abilities. But the acknowledgement of his patrons was not. Enjoying the show, he spat as he glared at the roof. Distant powers and their observations could wait. The ritual required his focus for the time being. He was in less than ideal condition to be choosing new abilities, but he would do the best he could. Time pressed. His eyes fell to the bottom of the page where he was required to make his choices. Better get to it before I bleed out on the floor. I'm surprised Jaw hasn't shown up to offer a twisted deal, he muttered. Oh, I wouldn't be so crass as to assume you are on your last leg, yet came her voice from behind him. Tyron didn't turn, but smiled briefly. And here I thought you might be losing interest. My mistress remains interested, but the terms she desires are not ones you would be willing to accept in your current condition. I have a sword in me. Just how much worse does she think it's going to get? Much. Well, that's comforting. Though, I suppose it simply confirms that Yor expects me to survive this on my own. The pain was overwhelming, but he was able to endure it, if only just. Focus. Finish the ritual. Look for something that will help you survive. There were 2 new choices for Undead Weaver, along with the previously declined Ghoul Flesh. Bone Animus replaces Bone Stitching, and increases the maximum level to 20. A finer weave allows more strength with less magic. Empowered Bone Armor replaces Bone Armor and increases the maximum level to 20. A modified spell to enable greater protection. Neither was an aid to him in his current circumstances, but both were choices he otherwise liked. He placed a bloody mark with his thumb next to Bone Animus and moved on to the feats. Zombie Focus I improved the quality of raised zombies. Skeleton Focus 3 improved the quality of raised skeletons. Spirit Focus I improved the quality of raised spirits. Flesh Mastery increased skill with flesh-based undead and abilities. Bone Mastery increased skill with bone-based undead and abilities. Spirit Mastery increased skill with spirit-based undead and abilities. Minion Controller improved the capacity to direct undead. Undead Specialist increased the maximum level of raised dead by 10. Intelligent Dead improved the minds of undead minions. Boon Giver spells and abilities that empower the dead are strengthened. Much as he had suspected, each of the feats was related to his minions. That fell in line with the direction of the class, and under normal circumstances, he would be pleased to see them. There were many he would like to take, though he could only select 4. The sight of Skeleton Focus 3 was a jolt of energy. If there was a 3, then there may even be a 4. Since he was stacking bonuses, then stacking them as high as he could was a good choice. He wished there was more time to consider each option, consult with Dove, but there wasn't. A thumbprint was placed next to Bone Mastery, and he moved on. Hopefully, the patrons had something he could use to assist in his current situation. Anathema has reached level 14. Choose 2 of the following. 2 choices to make, 4 new abilities. As a last resort, blood healing may serve his needs, but he would rather avoid it if possible. Air of Menace surround oneself in a dread aura. Pain inflict the target with severe pain. Invasive Persuasion open a weakness to manipulation in a suppressed mind. Fear implant leave an impression of fear within a suppressed mind. Blood healing convert the blood of others to a healing serum. Eyes of blood see sources of blood nearby. Glamour conceal your features. Rot's favor encourage infection. Abyss tongue commune with the realm between. Soul transfusion consume a soul to heal the body. Tyron grunted. He wasn't surprised to see an ability like Soul Transfusion pop up. Almost exactly what he needed in his current circumstances. He had an abundance of souls around him at the moment, vile killers every one of them. He could conjure one and consume it in minutes, easy as snapping his fingers. And after he'd done it once, how easy it would be to do it again. He could already feel the justifications becoming less and less difficult to find. How long until he didn't care at all anymore? You think because I've sacrificed one soul, I'll be prepared to do it again. And once I do, it'll be so easy to turn around and offer more to my patrons. The ground felt slippery beneath his feet. Dark gods, vampires and abyssal deities. Those were the source of the abilities the anathema class offered. Corruption, deception, domination, and death. That was what they wanted to give him. It wasn't hard to see what they wanted to make of him, the path they seemed so determined to set his feet upon. They can fuck off. He grit his teeth and put a mark next to glamour and invasive persuasion. Both abilities would prove useful in his attempts to try and deflect people who happened to come across them. He hadn't wanted to manipulate anyone that way, but that'd be naive. Better to dominate their mind and have them forget they ever saw him than to kill them. As for his wound, he would need to survive as best he could on his own. He'd been wrong to think he could rely on anyone else. The patrons would help, but only on their own terms. Choices made, he grit his teeth, grasped the sword, and slid it out of his guts before he ended the ritual, letting the weapon clatter to the floor. The sudden rush of power was shocking, as always. New knowledge etched itself on his brain even as the unseen reached into his body, changing it from within. He grew stronger, tougher, smarter, more persuasive, more determined. All of it was welcome, but the toughness was what he cared about right now. Thank goodness for it. He could finally appreciate why the necromancer class received so much constitution. Of course, everyone would ignore the minions and come for his head if they could. The only way to survive was to be able to take a hit and keep going. Clutching at his wound, he staggered about, looking for something he could use to bandage himself. An old curtain had to suffice, torn in strips and bound around his midsection. Job done, he went outside to find Dove hollering at nothing. Kid, you still alive? The fuck is going on? Shut it, he ground out as he made it back to the table. Holy shit. Are you alright? No, I'm not alright. I had a fucking sword in me. I got some levels, hopefully it'll toughen me up enough to survive. Now try and shut up. I've got a ton of things to do, and this hurts. Like he laughed and then grunted in pain, a stab wound. Things to do. Did your fucking balls land on your head? You need to get out of here. Can't leave yet, Tyron said as he cast his eyes about for stones. There's too much here I can't afford to leave behind. Chapter 84. The cart rattled over the uneven road and Tyron groaned. Fucking, shut up already. The young mage grimaced as he tried to resist touching his side for the umpteenth time. It didn't help. In fact, all it did was get blood on his hand and irritate the wound. Another jostle, another groan. By the tits, shut your damn mouth. You had the chance to fix the wound, and you passed it up, so fucking deal with it. Tyron sat up with difficulty. The pain from his wound, a constant throbbing that reverberated through his entire body. You'd really eat someone's soul to heal yourself? He asked. Yes, I fucking would. I can't believe how stupid you are. I think your damn balls are too big for your own good. It's making you stupid or blind. Is that it? You can't see past your own colossal fucking sack and notice the obvious solution right in front of your face. Ask a stupid question. He chuckled. Maybe I am stupid, that is. He gestured to his pants, stained red with drying blood. His own blood. As you can see, my testicles are quite standard, but I can't deny that I'm dumb enough to risk my life over pride. As tempting as it was to argue back at the skull, to defend his morals and point of view, there really wasn't any point. Dove was worried about him. That was why he was so angry. The pragmatic summoner wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice one of those bandit souls to heal him if he could. Before he died, he'd already shown he was willing to kill others to keep Tyron alive. Stupidity and pride. He refused to rely on the patrons, refused to play their games. A dumb decision if ever there was one, and it was pride that got in his way. He would do it himself, and do it his own way, or not at all. They won't fucking control me. I refuse to be controlled. A sigh emanated from the skull, and Tyron turned his weary gaze back to his friend. You aren't stupid, kid. We both know that. I think I'm starting to see your parents in you at last. Magnan and Beery are legendary for wanting to go their own way, and it seems like the apple didn't drop far from the tree. Tyron felt a warm glow inside at being compared to his parents. You really think so? He said. Oh goddess, don't look so pleased. Oh, that's disgusting. You have the look of a loving child yearning for the approval of a parent all over your face. It's too pure for me. Get it away before I manifest spirit spew. Turn me around or something, for fuck's sake. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, which caused another spike of pain, which was followed with another groan. Serves you right, Dove said acerbically as Tyron lay clutching at his side. Don't let me see your inner self ever again. I'm here to help a badass, Killer-crazed necromancer gets some revenge on the pricks who branded me, not babysit a vulnerable young man who didn't get enough love as a child. Can't I be both of those things? No, you fucking cannot. The two lapsed into silence, and Tyron reflected on the previous night. He'd killed a slayer, but he shied away from examining that thought too closely. It was what it was and he couldn't do a thing about it. He refused to give up, so he had to keep going forward. That was all there was to it. Killing bandits had proved to be a profitable endeavor in terms of experience and levels, as he'd hoped it would be. Everything had become a blur after he was wounded, but he must have collected bones from 10 corpses, and at least 5 spirits, before the light had begun to creep over the horizon. To stay any longer than that would have been foolish in the extreme, so he gathered his work and left. It was mid-morning now, the sun edging closer to its zenith. I should have stolen a cart with a roof on it. At least it wasn't too hot out here in the Western Province, otherwise having the heat beating down on them all day would have been too much to bear. Stop your whining and get to work, Tyron admonished himself. He'd achieved his goal of securing more levels. He hadn't been able to get all the bandits. Much to his irritation, several of them still burned in his awareness, fading into the distance as the cart rolled forward. It was unlikely he'd get a chance to go back and get the rest, so they were in the clear, for now. As a reward for the risks, hard work and stab wound, he'd been able to take a giant step forward in his Undead Weaver class, gaining his first feat and a new ability to boot. Upgrading his bone stitching skill excited him even further than the feat, to be honest. Taking such basic, fundamental skills and pushing them as far as possible was the hallmark of a true expert, so his father had always said, and he knew this had the potential to be huge. Empowered bone armor would be nice, and he would be extremely tempted to select it in the future. After receiving his first serious battle wound, he was eager to put further impediments between him and getting hurt. But for now, his minions took priority. He'd spent the hours groaning in the back of the cart trying to digest the information granted to him by the skill, and he felt he was approaching the point where he would need to test some things. Moving slowly, he raised his hands and began to weave, then stopped and shook his head. He tried again. After a few seconds, he paused once more and frowned. Something wasn't right. Nearby, a bag of leg bones sat against a pile of others, still slightly damp at the bottom from having the washed femurs and tibia thrown in. He pulled it towards him and fished a few out, hoping that working on actual bones might help him concentrate. His gut ached something fierce, but he tried to focus and push the pain away. He had to endure, or else he may as well roll over and give himself up. Arranging the bones with care, he even grabbed a fibula for good measure. He brought to mind everything he'd learned about the knee joint. It had taken many iterations, but he'd eventually settled on a weave for the knee that he felt struck a good balance between power, efficiency and support. Could he make a better joint if he wanted to? Absolutely, but it would require significantly more work. There simply wasn't the time to produce the absolute best. As his mother had always said, an 80% result only requires 50% of the effort. Sometimes it's worth it to push for the final 20, and sometimes it isn't. Tyron judged that in this instance, it wasn't. Again, he raised his hands and prepared to weave, but just as he started, curling those first few threads around each other, he realized it felt wrong. Something he was doing didn't mesh with the way the upgraded skill wanted him to work, but what was it? Thinking hard, he looked down at the bones arranged in his lap. Bone stitching was a technique that involved using threads of magic to create a weave that mimicked the properties of muscle and tendons. Skeletons obviously lacked those things, so this was a requirement for them to be able to move. The upgraded skill, Bone Animus, should work in a similar way, but be improved in some fashion. With knowledge crammed into his skull by the unseen, he felt that was the case, but he couldn't quite figure out how it was meant to be done. Letting his instinct take over, he brought his hands forward again, but this time he didn't summon the threads from his fingertips immediately, but tried to listen to those fragments of instinct he had been granted. His hands drifted closer to the bones, then closer still. He kept expecting that he would feel the right moment to bring out the threads and continue to work, but to his surprise, that didn't happen. Instead, his hands continued to move forward until they were resting on the cold surface of the bone themselves. Of course. Why didn't I think of that? Only now did he feel it was right to summon the threads, but not attached to his fingers, That wouldn't work for what the skill wanted him to do. He had to create them inside the bone. What is the benefit of that? How would that help? Normally, the weave was created outside, and then would tighten when he was done, bonding to the outside of the skeleton. If it were inside, would that be more efficient? Soaked inside the death magic contained within the bones themselves, would that have an effect? Or perhaps just being protected would make the weave more resilient to damage and wear. Curious, he began to try and manipulate the threads, and quickly grew frustrated. This was ridiculous. Trying to weave inside the bones was like trying to stitch through a keyhole. Except even that tiny gap was blocked. What he was really doing was manipulating the threads through a thin wall using only his mind. Slow down, concentrate. You can do this. It wouldn't do to be impatient. Tyron took a deep breath and focused. He'd mastered bone stitching. Though it had tangled his fingers into a useless snarl at first, he would do the same with this. So he began to work, letting everything else, even the throbbing pain of his wound, fade to the background, as he devoted himself single-mindedly to moving the threads. He was sluggish. It was difficult to sense the threads, and difficult to move them. Doing both at the same time was almost impossible, so at first, he didn't try. He would shift the minute threads a little, then check them, then shift them again, over and over. After an hour, he'd made some progress toward completing the knee joint. And he was mentally exhausted. Were he in his best condition, working inside on a steady table, it would have gone much better. For now, this was the best he could do. This is surprisingly difficult, but it's interesting at the same time. Despite not being able to complete the joint, he could tell there was something different about it. The weave felt more flexible, especially when he connected one bone to another. Probably because the weave connected through the bone rather than around them. That also gave him a lot of flexibility in the way he went about shaping the weave. In fact, he had many more options now that he didn't have to surround the joint. A thought struck him. Hey, Dove, someone with a spear doesn't have the same musculature as someone specialized in, say, a hammer, right? The skull scoffed. Of course, it's completely fucking different. Even swordsmen are going to be built slightly differently based on the weight and length of the weapon they choose. I've never swung a sword in my life, and I know that much. Tyron chuckled. I really am an idiot. What now? Well, all my skeletons have the exact same weave. Right. But they don't all use the same weapons. Ah. A pause. About time you realized it, dipshit. Dove. Yeah. I know. It's obvious when you think about it, right? It sure is. His new technique would allow for greater flexibility in the weave, which meant one skeleton could be differentiated further from another. It wasn't too late that he'd only noticed this now. Possibilities began to unfold in his mind. The threads of magic used to form the weave essentially acted as an energy converter, taking arcane energy and changing it to movement, and also acted to bind the skeleton together. By changing the weave, he could do a ton of different things. His shield-bearing skeletons could be bulked up with a thicker weave, allowing them to convert more magic to movement, effectively making them physically stronger. When they got into pitched battles and pushing matches, they would hold the line more effectively. He could add extra weave to a skeleton's legs and hips, allowing them to walk faster, or bulk up the shoulders of those using heavier weapons like maces. All he'd really cared about before was efficiency. His minions had to be as efficient as possible so he could support more, but as his expertise increased, he was making efficiency savings in other areas. When he took into account his vastly increased magic capacity, specializing his skeletons and allowing them to draw on more power wouldn't be an issue until he had almost 50. I've got so much to do, he groaned. Chapter 85. Did you hear something? Tyron asked, coming alert suddenly. No, obviously. I didn't fucking hear anything. My hearing isn't exactly the best it's ever been right now. Shut up for a second. The skull grumbled quietly to himself, but fell silent a few moments later as Tyron continued to survey the grassland around them. For 2 days, they had continued their slow way south, trying to get lost in the winding trails amongst the foothills. It appeared to have worked, at least so far, as they hadn't seen any slayers. They'd managed to find a scattering of rift kin, which had been somewhat surprising. Small scuttlers, hunting for any grazing animals or remote communities they could find, easily put down by the skeletons. Tyron cocked his head and listened. The wind was a constant here, whistling between rocks and crags. But even so, he thought he heard something. After a moment, there was no response, so he dropped the bandage in his hands and began to work his magic. Looking through the eyes of his minions, he found nothing, which was somewhat reassuring. Just to be safe, he redistributed a few, increasing the number of skeletons close to the cart. You're as jumpy as a flea in a fire, kid. Do you blame me? If a team of slayers finds me, even trainees who haven't reached bronze yet, I'm completely fucked. I'd rather not be dead, Dove. Ho, living the lick life can't be all that bad. I mean, I'm halfway there, and let me tell you, I can't even pretend it's good, actually. This sucks. Are you going to bind that hole in your gut or what? After a few more moments, Tyron lowered his head and got back to cleaning his wound. Superhuman physical toughness was one thing, but basic injury care to prevent infection would go a long way. As hard as it had been, he'd had to force himself to stop, hide the cart behind the slope of a hill, and remove his bandage to boil it. The fabric wasn't the best, but after 20 minutes soaking in water, it was clean enough that he took it out to dry. The wound itself wasn't pretty. It still ached like hell, though he was pleased to see it wasn't puffy or overly red. If there was any internal damage, he'd have to cross his fingers and hope it was able to resolve itself. Thankfully, the blade hadn't punctured a lung, but the chance it had perforated his bowel was very real. Unnaturally tough he might be, but there were limits. Should I try to find a village? See if they have a healer of some kind? It was highly unlikely that they would. Small communities couldn't afford the ministrations of someone with a proper, dedicated healing class. More likely he'd find someone with a skill or two they developed to help their neighbors, and make a little extra coin on the side. But did he have the time? He might have to risk it. He finished wrapping the bandage and tied it off before he pulled his shirt back on. My last clean-ish shirt. The last one had an unfortunate hole through it, and some rather significant bloodstains. He ditched it in a creek when he had the chance. Worse still, his cloak hadn't come out unscathed, and there was no replacement for that. Against the cold, he didn't have an option but to make the best of it. A moment later, he stilled, then continued to go about his preparations nonchalantly. Several ghosts began to drift to new positions under his mental command. Just about time to get moving again, he said to Dove as casually as he could manage. I mean, I can't exactly move, you know, the skull replied acerbically. I just sit in the back of the wagon for days on end, watching the gorgeous scenery go by. Oh, come now, what about the sparkling conversation? It was all he could do not to scan the surrounding rock as he kicked over the last of the coals and pulled himself back into the wagon. Sparkling. Have you ever met yourself, Tyron? All you talk about is magic and whinge about getting stabbed. All you talk about is magic and how much you miss having a dick. A lot, by the way. My balls are a close second and third, but definitely the dick most. The skeletons picked up the cart and began to rattle down the path as Tyron settled, doing his best to appear focused on the bones in front of him. Surreptitiously, he worked his magic, allowing his eyes to be overtaken by the vision of a ghost. Nothing. He shifted its position. Still nothing. Perhaps he was just being paranoid. He tried another ghost. Nothing. One more. Nothing. With a sigh, he shifted its orientation, about to give up, when he thought he noticed something. Did that rock move? Keeping the spirit at a slight distance to prevent its cold aura from giving it away, he had it rotate around the suspicious stone to get a better look. Damn these horrible undead eyes. I swear I saw it shift. The offending rock was positioned overlooking the slight dip where he'd stopped to make a fire, perfect for someone wanting to observe him. Maybe he was paranoid, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. He waited, watching as closely as he could. There. That time, he caught it. He was sure of it. Someone was watching. Blood and bone, he cursed. He'd been found. He swallowed, then began to prepare another spell, as the cart continued to wobble its slow way down the road. There would only be one shot at this, and he had to win. Once he was ready, he breathed out, then snapped around in his seat, hands outflung to hold the spell at his intended target. Dominate mind. The instant he moved, the hidden observer did too, breaking cover to escape, but they weren't quick enough. The spell took hold and Tyron found himself locked in a deadly battle of wills with his opponent. Using this spell against a person was very different from using it against a Rifkin. The monsters weren't defenseless against it. Far from it, they fought with a desperate rage-fueled frenzy, the madness that possessed all kin driving them to push back. But they weren't intelligent, they didn't understand what was happening to them, they just lashed out. It was relatively easy to suppress them as long he was steeled for it. Using it against a person was another matter. They were more cognizant of the stakes, more cunning in how and when they lashed out. There was a cry from above as Tyron slammed his will against the observers, but he didn't allow himself to get distracted. The stakes were too high for that. Eyes closed, sweat burst out of his brow as he brought his mind to bear. The Slayer fought back, for it had to be a Slayer. Their will far stronger than that of the farmer he'd done this to before. Like trying to pin down a snake, Tyron struggled to grab it safely. But it wasn't that easy. The Slayer writhed in his grip, stabbing in one direction one moment, then in another the next. To be successful, he had to suppress them completely to the point they surrendered. Fearing for their life, the Slayer fought back furiously. Tyron grit his teeth and abandoned his careful strategy. Trying to pin down a snake without getting bit might be the smartest strategy, but he couldn't be cautious. Throwing away his sense of self-preservation, he lunged forward with his will, driving directly into the mind of the Slayer. In return, he was pummeled, his opponent lashing at him with wild abandon. He struck back again and again, smashing his will against theirs with cruel purpose. He would drive them to submit, he had to. A fierce headache blossomed behind his eyes as he was struck over and over. But he had the better of the exchange. Eventually, his opponent weakened, and he closed his grip around their mind ruthlessly. It was over, and Tyron fought back his distaste at the sensation of holding another's mind in his grip. He couldn't be squeamish now. The worst was yet to come. In a way, it was a good thing he couldn't see the Slayer clearly. Whatever they'd done to conceal themselves was still in effect. According to his eyes, he was having a battle of wills with a suspicious rock. Kid, what the hell was that? I can't see. Slayer Tyron said tightly. Oh, fuck. It's alright, I've suppressed them. Well, that's nice, I suppose. What happens when you release the spell? Taking care of that now. That sounds ominous. Can always use another corpse for the pile. Not like that. With the Slayer held tightly in his grip, they were at his mercy, unable to move or defend themselves. It would be simple to have a skeleton run them through, but that was a dead end for him. He was already a marked man. Slayers didn't take it too well when their own were killed. Kicking the hornet nest would only make things worse. If he took more lives, if more Slayers disappeared, they'd never stop hunting him. When the Rift kin were dead and things returned to normal, the Slayers would return to the keeps and get back to doing what they do best. If he'd murdered a bunch of them on the way, that wouldn't happen. They'd stay until he was dead in the ground. Take a breath, focus, don't fuck it up. There hadn't been a chance to practice this. He didn't have a target after all. Perhaps he could have asked Yor, but he was likely to end up dead if he did. Focusing on the magic, he concentrated on the Slayer, or more specifically, on their mind. Now that he had them in his control, he was able to implant a suggestion to persuade them that they had seen something they hadn't, or more specifically, convince them they hadn't seen something that they had. You found nothing. You saw nothing. No sign of a necromancer. No tracks. No trail. No wagon. Turn and leave. He repeated the thought over and over again, driving it into the mind he held in his grip. Drumming it over and over again, he gradually felt it take hold, sinking into the thoughts and settling there. You found nothing. You saw nothing. No sign of a necromancer. No tracks. No trail. No wagon. Turn and leave. When he was satisfied, he slowly released his grip, then watched through the eyes of his ghost as the Slayer stood, the rock disguise falling away to reveal itself as a cloak. It was a woman, perhaps. It was hard to tell through the ghost's eyes, and she walked, zombie-like, away. Tyron breathed a deep sigh of relief and released the spell. We need to get moving, he said to Dove. Oh, right. Well, I'll get right fucking on that. Shut up, Dove. More importantly, how in the name of fuck did you get that Slayer out of here? Implanted a suggestion in their mind that they'd never found us. Oof. That's twisted, kid. Manipulating thoughts like that. Disgusting. By the by, think we could stop by a brothel soon. I've got some thoughts about this new ability. You're sickening. You know that. Putting the protestations of the skull to one side, Tyron focused on having the skeletons move the cart as quickly as their bony feet would carry them. He needed to get south. Sky Ice Keep would be his next best bet of finding Riftkin to kill, and perhaps it would be a little safer, being the most isolated Slayer keep in the province. As long as they didn't get found again. Say, Dove, he said as the cart continued to rattle forward. I had a thought about ghosts. By the mother's milker's kid, can't we talk about breasts for a chance? So, to create a ghost, I need to create a type of shell, right? A magical construct of sorts. I've been wondering if I can overlay that. You know the repository ritual. How could I forget? Well, the two bounced ideas off each other for the next few hours, until night fell. Yor found them still arguing back and forth and rolled her eyes. Every night started the same way. How much longer, do you think? Beery spat through gritted teeth. Magnin grunted, breath whistling as he tried to suck in air through the pain. Not sure, he gasped. They've started working harder. Don't you think? They certainly had. It appeared the Magisters had grown tired of their resistance, and redoubled their efforts. In a strange way, the increased pain pleased her. No doubt those pricks were sweating right now. They'd never have expected her and Magnin to last as long as they had. Nobody had tried to circumvent the brand in centuries. Nobody as good as her, anyway. The Magisters had been complacent. The fact that she and her husband were still alive was proof enough of that. The brands aren't enough to kill us, she ground out. Their only choice is to break us down. Oh, Magnin tried to chuckle, but it came out as a pained wheeze. It's working. We're buying him time. Hold on. Of course. He'd done so well, better than expected. His body might be grossly powerful, but his mind and will were more vulnerable. Every hour we can give him increases his chances. We have to hold. Sweat poured from Magnin's brow, and he grunted with every second breath. She'd never seen him look so worn, not even in his youth. Did I ever tell you, he wheezed, that I love you? Her eyes softened despite the agony that ripped through her. Yes, my heart, every day. Gee, good. She reached out and placed a palm against his face. Just a few more days, she told him. You can make it. Course I can. Don't underestimate me, woman. Never. Not like the Magisters. They dared to try and clip her wings, Magnin's wings. Vengeance would find them. The entire empire would burn for what they'd done. Of that, she was confident. This is the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for your kind comments. Have a wonderful rest of the day. The silent ruptures out.